I paid $2,870 for Dubai. Dad gave my seat to my brother, Aunt's genius CEO. I froze my cards. You stranded us, he screamed at the airport. I'm a 32-year-old male project manager for a Fort Worth-based commercial signage company. I started as an installer, climbing scaffolding and erecting signs in the 105-degree heat of Texas summers, where the metal would physically burn your flesh if you didn't wear gloves. I climbed the ranks through hard effort and competence. Now, I manage contracts ranging from local stadiums to corporate skyscrapers. Last quarter, I managed $1,300,000 in projects, all of which were completed on time and within budget. I earn approximately $85,000 per year, with bonuses when projects go well. 4 years ago, my parents went through a difficult time due to COVID. Dad worked in building sales for decades, until the epidemic struck and the industry collapsed. He was making six figures providing commercial-grade supplies to developers in 3 states. Then, everything froze overnight. Mom hasn't had consistent work, always with a new reason, back issues, a shifting job market, and now it's her candle-making business, which strangely costs more than it makes. When their landlord sold their rental home, they faced the possibility of becoming homeless. They asked if I could assist them get back on their feet. I've always been practical with money. I still drive a 12-year-old Toyota 4Runner with 187,000 miles on it that runs beautifully. Even if I could afford anything newer, it performs flawlessly. It's paid off and built to last. I had the forethought to purchase a second property as an investment in 2018. Nothing extravagant, just a nice 2-bedroom condo in a safe neighborhood with strong rental potential. I put down 20% to avoid PMI and secured a solid 3.5% 30-year fixed rate before rates skyrocketed. I agreed to let my parents move in for $800 per month, almost 1/3 of the market cost. The mortgage costs $1,400 plus $320 in HOA fees. So I was losing money each month. I assumed they'd be appreciative, get back on their feet, and either begin paying market rates or get their own house within a year. Fast forward 4 years, and that rent money has appeared approximately 60% of the time. Over the course of 4 years, my parents have shorted me around $15,000 in rent. Isabella, my 26-year-old sister, moved in 2 years ago, which only made matters worse. "We'll catch up next month," became their mantra. Why are you being so difficult about this? Isabella has her own specific category of entitlement. She has a marketing degree and was a party girl before becoming career-oriented when the real world demanded genuine labor. She moved in with my parents approximately 2 years ago, when her housemates became tired of paying her portion of the rent. She spent roughly 3 months working as a freelance social media consultant before securing an entry-level position at a local marketing agency. She was continuously complaining about being undervalued, while having no portfolio to show. She earns around $42,000, but spends like she's making $120,000. When I brought up the missing rent, Mom would say, "We're family, not a corporation. Why are you nickel and diming us?" Meanwhile, they never missed a payment on their new SUV or Isabella's monthly spa visits. Dad once informed me, with a straight face, that they couldn't afford rent that month because Isabella's hair extensions cost $400. Last year, I drove over unannounced on a Saturday and discovered they were throwing a backyard barbecue for around 20 people. They had installed a new 75-inch TV that I had never seen before, and they had recently completed a kitchen overhaul with granite countertops. When I inquired about the rent money owed to me, Mom replied, "Not now. We have guests." As if I were the one who was impolite. The breaking point came in March, when Dad retired. Unlike other construction workers, he avoided serious injuries, though his knees are utterly damaged from years of job site visits. He needs replacement surgery but is putting it off. For years he'd expressed his desire to visit Dubai, calling it the greatest construction achievement of our time. For example, he provided personal advice on the Burj Khalifa blueprint. He had a coffee table book on Dubai buildings that he'd browse through at least once a week, informing anyone who would listen about the technical feats. I resolved to make it happen as a retirement gift, hoping that it would finally earn some gratitude and even rekindle our relationship. $28,000 for a 10-day trip to Dubai, which includes first-class Emirates flights from DFW, a 4-star hotel near the Burj Khalifa, desert safari excursions and other amenities. I spent weeks studying the ideal time to visit, and even contacted my college mate James, who has been working for an engineering firm there for 3 years. He lives like a king in an expat complex, driving a Mercedes that he acquired tax-free. He promised to show us the real Dubai, not the tourist traps. When I revealed the vacation at dinner, Isabella asked if Oliver might join us after approximately 5 minutes of amazement and thankfulness. Oliver, you're so annoying. Oliver is my sister's fiancé. What happens when privilege meets delusion? Imagine every LinkedIn stereotype crammed into one 29-year-old with perfect teeth and a trust fund he denies exists. He describes himself as a serial entrepreneur and disruptive business strategist, yet his true business model consists of discussing business while others pay his bills. His LinkedIn page reads like AI-generated business rubbish. Lots of leveraging synergies but no actual revenue. His profile picture shows him in front of a rented Tesla, pointing at nothing and wearing a Patagonia vest. Classic. His venture finance connections include a second cousin who works as an administrative assistant for a firm that previously invested in a failed meal kit startup. He continually mentions tech businesses as if he had inside knowledge, yet it's all information he read on TechCrunch that morning. Every chat with him ends with a pitch for his current enterprise, which is always obscure enough that you don't know what it does. Last Thanksgiving, he cornered me and spent 40 minutes describing his breakthrough app idea. The entire notion was essentially Uber, except for dog walking, which currently exists in approximately 12 different versions. He has an incredible ability to order the most costly item on any menu, while also going for his phone when the bill arrives. Classic move. Oh, I need to answer this email quickly. Then comes a 15-minute restroom break, which coincides with bill payment time. I originally declined Oliver's request to join. I was spending my entire budget on 4 people. Isabella immediately became full. Karen, why are you continually ruining everything? It's not like you can't afford it with your lucrative project management position. She casually ignored the reality that her marketing expert position earned her enough for a weekend trip to Austin, not a luxury Dubai holiday. My parents agreed with her. Mom's traditional guilt trip, but we are family. Oliver will soon become a family member. Don't you want everyone to attend your father's retirement celebration? Dad joined in. It would be great to have everyone there, son. Oliver is actually very informed about international business. I looked Oliver in the eye and said, if you want to come, you can pay your own way. It should be pocket change for someone with your business acumen. The way his face twitched revealed everything I needed to know about his bank account. He murmured something about liquidating certain assets and transferring monies from overseas accounts, which I believe was code for asking his father for money. The topic seemed to fade after a few days. I assumed they had finally accepted my boundaries. I should have known better. These are the people who believe that boundaries are simply suggestions, such as speed restrictions or tax legislation. Oliver used to brag about a college buddy who now works with the TSA at DFW. He stated, if I ever needed a favor, he'd take care of it. Oliver smirked. I believed he was full of it. Now everything makes sense, but I am getting ahead of myself. Oliver cornered me in my parents' kitchen 2 weeks before the trip when I was getting coffee. So I've been thinking about maximizing our Dubai opportunity, he explained, barely looking up from his phone. Uh-huh. I answered, unconcerned as I poured myself a cup of coffee I'd brought over. We need to schedule meetings with real estate developers while we are there. The UAE market is ripe for upheaval, and I have ideas they'll want to hear. I chuckled, assuming he was joking. He was not. Seriously, all the major players are present. Emaar Properties, Inquil, DMAC. This could be an excellent opportunity to acquire seed investment for my next enterprise. Not in the budget, Oliver. I stated that I have already covered the entire $28,000 for the family trip. I had really looked into these firms while preparing the trip. The idea of meeting with a random American with no portfolio credentials or a business plan seemed ridiculous. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime networking chance, he insisted, eventually looking up from his phone. I've been working on a new co-living concept that mixes our job with high-end residential. So, an apartment building that has desks? I inquired, and his eyes narrowed. It is more complicated than that. It's about establishing synergistic living conditions that encourage idea sharing while increasing square footage utility. Right. Still not within the budget. That evening, Isabella confronted me about it, calling me a jerk for failing to assist Oliver with an important business opportunity. She said that I sabotaged his career because I was jealous of his vision. I stood my ground. The vacation was for Dad's retirement, not Oliver's imagined business ventures. Fast forward to the day of departure. My phone buzzed as I was finishing up papers for an assignment. A text message from Mom. We've decided that Oliver will join us on the trip instead of you. He is more entertaining and will take better images for social media. Your father agrees that he will be better company than you. I stared at my phone. My stomach sank. Was this a nasty joke? I responded, asking what she meant. She responded, I'm serious. Oliver is taking your seat, and you can always go on another trip sometime. We need Oliver there for his business connections anyway. I replied with one word. Understood. Then I closed my office door and did something they least expected. I called Emirates directly to find out what was going on. While I was sitting in my office 20 meters away, the agent confirmed that I had been checked in for departure in 3 hours. After consulting with officials, I learned that Isabella had contacted Emirates a week earlier, claiming I had a medical emergency. She attempted to get the ticket transferred to Oliver's name, but Emirates does not allow straightforward name transfers. Instead, they planned to have Oliver use my boarding card to get through security. It wasn't simply a family drama anymore, this was a hoax. I contacted Emirates back and spoke with the fraud department. I had leverage because everything was booked in my name and with my credit card. While they couldn't block passengers who had already checked in for today's flight, they could flag the return leg for security inspection. I then demanded a full cancellation and refund for the return tickets, charging fraud. Next, I went to Booking.com and canceled the hotel bookings. Then I called each tour operator and canceled every excursion. I called James in Dubai and explained the issue. They were set to board a flight to a nation they had never visited, believing everything was paid for, but I had canceled it all. They had forced me to abandon my own vacation in order to accompany Oliver. That is chilly, man. He paused. Also completely deserved. What are they going to do once they land? Figure it out, I suppose. Dubai is not exactly inexpensive for inexperienced tourists. A decent supper at a mid-range restaurant might cost $50 to $75 per person. A taxi from the airport to the city center would cost approximately $50. Their emergency cash would be depleted within 48 hours. Then I called my bank and reported my credit card as compromised, received a new one with a different number, and temporarily froze my other accounts in case anyone knew my account information. I was not taking any chances. These individuals had demonstrated that they felt entitled to my money. My best friend Matt always saw through their BS and warned me, but I didn't pay any attention to it. So I texted him. Remember that conversation about consequences? It's happening now. Later that night, he arrived with beers and his locksmith buddy Ryan. By 10 p.m., every lock on my rental property had been replaced, new security cameras had been installed, and a keypad lock had been set near the front entrance. I phoned a property management business that I had previously worked with. Had them draft a formal leasing agreement at the full market rate. $2,850 per month, utilities not included. First and final month's rent required immediately upon signing. Finally, I contacted my real estate attorney. I'd previously hired him for property concerns, and he immediately prepared an official eviction notice, giving them 30 days to sign the new lease or quit the premises. That was not all. While my real estate attorney was preparing the eviction paperwork, I detailed how Oliver used my personal information to board the trip. He had essentially committed identity theft. My attorney, who also handled criminal matters, immediately recognized the opportunity. "We need to document this completely," he stated. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's potentially criminal fraud." The next morning, I filed a police report carrying printouts of my text messages, images of the original booking confirmation, and flight records proving that someone had used my ticket. The officer taking the report seemed delighted with my documentation. "Most identity theft cases lack this amount of evidence," he said. "Typically, it is simply a suspicious charge on someone's credit card, rather than a completely documented case with admissions and text messages." I also contacted Emirates back and wanted to speak with the fraud department. When I detailed what had transpired, the representative was appalled. "Sir, this is a serious security breach," she told me. "Someone using another person's boarding pass and identification is something we closely monitor." She reported the matter for internal review and told me that an investigation would be conducted. "Remember Oliver's TSA buddy? It appears that the person assisted him in bypassing the ID check." Emirates did not notice the mismatch until the return leg, which prompted a security review. My attorney sent a formal cease and desist letter addressing the identity theft and assisted me in filing charges for identity fraud and abuse of personal information. Their Emirates flight arrived in Dubai at around 7 p.m. local time. I imagined the enthusiasm as they grew. They were all grins and Instagram stories, excited for their luxury holiday, but there was no hotel shuttle waiting. No reservation means no return flights. Matt came over to my house that night with pizza and beers. We also spent some time creating a detailed spreadsheet that tracked every penny they borrowed or took from me over the years, including dates, amounts, and any promises to repay. The first anxious call arrived on my phone at 9 p.m. my time. I didn't respond. Then another, and another. My phone started filling up with text messages, which Matt and I read aloud between slices of pizza. Isabella. What did you do? Oliver. This is totally unprofessional and perhaps unlawful. My attorney will contact you. Mom. Please call us back. We do not know what to do. I responded with a single text. Oliver will make you feel at ease in Dubai. I hear he's more entertaining than I am. Then I turned off my phone and slept well for the first time in months. Matt couldn't stop giggling. Dude, who is Oliver's attorney? What attorney represents those who are unable to buy their own aircraft tickets? The same one that handles all of his billion-dollar transactions, I said, reaching for another slice of pizza. 2 days later, I turned back on my phone. The messages were becoming more fascinating. Dad, we had to call Oliver's father to wire emergency funds. You embarrassed me in front of Isabella, my new family member. Oliver fell off a camel on the desert tour, which we had to book at the last minute. He shattered his arm and is unable to photograph anything right now. Mom is really upset. This is entirely your responsibility. Screw you. It's amazing how my fault reaches to a pissed-off camel. From their communications, I was able to piece together a fairly accurate image of their Habibi journey. They were trapped at the airport with no hotel reservations, no transportation, and rapidly depleted finances. They had to contact Oliver's parents to wire emergency funds. That must have been an enjoyable talk. Hey Dad, we need $5,000 wired quickly, or we'll be sleeping at the airport. They stayed 3 nights at a modest hotel near the airport, which supposedly had cockroaches the size of mice. According to my investigation, they likely paid around $400 each night for this privilege. Dubai's version of a budget hotel is nonetheless priced for oil barons when compared to American standards. Oliver had to sell his antique Rolex, which was the cut-o-grass. Definitely a knockoff to pay some costs. According to their texts, he received approximately $500 for a watch that he claimed was worth $12,000. Tragic. So they returned to Texas 5 days after their departure. Isabella's irate texts reveal that they spent the majority of their trip panicked, broke, and supposedly being followed by stray dogs near their inexpensive hotel. They spent the majority of their time arguing in the hotel room, with Oliver blaming her for the holiday from hell and my parents questioning their prospective son-in-law's business ability. My favorite, however, was when they supposedly attempted to visit the Burj Khalifa but were unable to buy the observation deck tickets. So the highlight of Dad's fantasy trip was something they could only see from the ground. It sucks to suck. When they arrived in an Uber, I was standing in my driveway with Matt. We were casually enjoying coffees, as if we were having a great time while they were suffering in Dubai. I'd positioned both of our vehicles in the driveway, my 4Runner and his Tacoma, so they couldn't pull in. What the actual heck was that? My father said as he stepped out of the car, his face lobster red from either the desert sun or wrath. I took a slow sip of coffee. That was what the repercussions looked like. My mother yelled, "You stranded us in a foreign country. We could have died. Yet here you are," I noticed. "I see you're alive and well, however you only have one functional arm." I nodded at Oliver, who had his arm in a makeshift sling. Oliver moved forward, wincing. "You know what you've done is actionable, right? I have contacts at 3 major law firms who would take up this issue pro gratis." Matt snorted. "Damn, that would be convenient. Do these law firms offer medical care for camel-related injuries? Because the sling appears like it was created by a toddler using a dish towel. You have no idea what we have gone through." Dad gave a growl. Oliver's arm fractured when the camel flung him. The hotel they put us in didn't have working air conditioning. Isabella contracted food illness from a street vendor. My mother stated that we had to spend 1 night at the airport since our credit cards did not work. And the embassy provided no assistance at all. This last part did not surprise me at all. What were they expecting the embassy to do? Hello, American Embassy. My son paid for a luxurious trip, only to cancel it when we refused to invite him. Please dispatch the Marines. Don't forget the camel incident, I replied, unable to conceal my smirk. I heard it was quite traumatic. Oliver's face became an even deeper shade of red. The camel was evidently not properly trained. I expressly told the advisor that I was an accomplished writer. "Oh, I am sure you did," Matt muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Isabella nearly burst into tears after you told him about your Fortune 500 connections and cryptocurrency portfolio. We had to call Oliver's father for money. Do you understand how humiliating that was?" I noted that it would be almost as humiliating to exclude someone from a trip they had paid for. "You never responded to our calls." Mom almost yelled. "We did not know what to do." "Well, you figured it out, right? And, From what I've heard, Dubai has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. You also had Oliver, an international business specialist. I assumed you were in capable hands. I dug into my back pocket and took out the lease agreement and eviction letter. Since we're having a heart-to-heart, let me clarify some things. Here are the new condominium terms. $2,850 per month. Utilities are not included. First and last month's rent are due immediately. You have 30 days to sign the new lease or depart the property. They stared at the documents as if I had given them a death sentence. This is illegal, Oliver said. You can't just. It's completely legal, I interrupted him. You were never on a lease. My parents have been month-to-month tenants, paying significantly less than the market rate, and I've chosen to amend the conditions. Everything is written down. Why? Mom asked. We don't have that kind of money right now. Not my problem, I said. I'm sure Oliver's parents can help you out again, as they did in Dubai. My father came forward, his voice softening. This is severe, son. We are talking about your family here. No, it's not about family. It is about business, and that is exactly what I am doing right now. As they turned to depart, I added one last point. Oh, and the locks have changed. You will receive your new keys after signing the lease and paying the first and last month's rent. You can gain access to your possessions by contacting the property management company specified on page 3. They did not sign the new lease. They also did not depart. My property manager's calls and emails were unanswered over the 30-day period. They figured they could wait me out, that I'd ultimately soften and let them go back to how things were. They were wrong. I filed for eviction exactly one day after the deadline had passed. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Throughout that time, they alternated between utterly ignoring me and sending manipulative texts. Mother, I raised you better than this. Dad, no son of mine would disrespect his family this way. Isabella, I hope you enjoy destroying our lives for your petty vendetta. Each message confirmed that I had made the correct option. They never acknowledged their involvement in creating the crisis. They never offered an apology or accepted responsibility. It was always about what I was doing with them. Never mentioned what they had done to me. I wasn't sitting around doing nothing while the eviction procedure was underway. The identity theft angle was also moving ahead. The police complaint I made was assigned to a detective who specializes in fraud crimes. He called me for a follow-up interview and was genuinely interested when I handed over the texts, screenshots and flight records proving Oliver had exploited my identity to board the aircraft. The detective stated that this is quite clear-cut. Most identity theft is difficult to establish, but they essentially admitted to it in writing. Yes, they were not exactly geniuses. The Emirates Fraud Department also finished its review. An airline official contacted to advise me that Oliver's passport had been detected in their system, which supported my initial hunch. He utilized my boarding pass and identifying information to go through security and onto the plane. My counsel was diligent throughout the process. He filed the identity theft and fraud charges independently from the eviction procedures, claiming that combining them would only complicate the situation. Allow the criminal justice system to address identity fraud while we focus on recovering your property. He emphasized that courts dislike it when persons attempt to merge civil and criminal cases. I will make good use of those 2 weeks. I met with my financial advisor to change my investment approach now that I'm not subsidizing 3 adults. I began chatting to a real estate agent about potential houses in up-and-coming communities and even revived my dating profile after a 2-year absence. The judge at the eviction hearing was a no-nonsense 60-year-old woman who had plainly seen every sob story in the book. My attorney presented the case, which included tenants refusing to sign a new lease or evacuate, a history of irregular payments, and the property owner's ability to change terms. Their defense consisted primarily of, "But we're family, and we've been there for years," neither of which impressed the judge. Dad attempted to bring up his knee difficulties after retirement, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "Sir, medical conditions, while unfortunate, do not create tenancy rights," she responded, peeking over her glasses. Oliver attempted to claim that as Isabella's fiancé, he had some sort of right to be involved. The judge shut that down so fast I almost felt bad for him. "Absolutely. Young man, unless your name is on a lease or you have established residency for the legally required period, you have no standing in these proceedings," she told him, without even trying to hide her irritation. The decision came down in my favor. They have 5 days to depart the premises. As we exited the courthouse, my mother grabbed my arm. "You cannot do this to us. Where are we supposed to travel in 5 days?" "Maybe ask Oliver," I suggested. "Isn't he basically part of the family now?" Oliver stepped forward. My parents are not going to house your family. That is your obligation. I laughed. It's interesting that your entrepreneurial mentality does not extend to fixing real-world problems. What happened to all the UAE investors you were supposed to impress? That meeting would have occurred if you had not destroyed the trip, he shot back. Right. I nodded. I'm sure the sheiks were lining up to throw money at him. What exactly is your business? I've known you for more than 2 years yet still have no notion what you do. Oliver had no idea that his identity theft troubles would only become worse. 2 days after the eviction hearing, Steve and Isabella received papers for the fraud case. The expression on his face when he realized this was not going away was priceless. It's like witnessing someone who has never faced responsibilities suddenly realize that their actions have ramifications. They spent the 5 days alternating between begging, threatening, and guilt-tripping. None of it worked. On day 5, they eventually moved out. My parents visited my aunt's residence. Despite his prior protests, Oliver and Isabella appeared to visit his parents' home. When they left, they grabbed everything that was not bolted down, including the property's equipment, such as the dishwasher, microwave, washer, and dryer. They also intentionally damaged many walls, shattered a bathroom mirror, and left all of their rubbish. My property manager documented everything, and I filed a complaint about property damage. My attorney suggested I take the stolen items to small claims court, but I chose to merely follow them and keep receipts. The replacement and repair expenditures amounted to approximately $4,200, which I entered into the spreadsheet recording their debt to me. I didn't expect to see a cent of it, but it felt vital to clarify the situation. Isabella also texted me. Hey, I know we had our troubles, but maybe we can get some coffee and talk about it. I'm willing to forgive everything if you assist us pay our first month's rent somewhere else. I did not respond. A day later, she texted again. Fine. I hope you enjoy being alone forever. Screw you. 2 days later, I received an SMS from my father. Your mother and I have decided that unless you apologize and make things right, you are no longer our son. We didn't raise you to be so callous. I said, I understand. Best of luck with everything. My mother began calling everyone in the extended family, explaining how I had abandoned them when they needed me the most. Conveniently, ignoring the years of cash assistance and the Dubai debacle. My father began sending increasingly threatening texts. The final one made some fairly clear warnings about how I'd regret this decision for the rest of my life. I did not bother answering. Instead, I conveyed the mail to my attorney, who issued a cease and desist letter. When that didn't stop the texts, I applied for a restraining order. The judge approved the restraining order after I presented him with over 30 threatening messages. The court bailiff who delivered the documents informed them that my father had gone on a tirade about ungrateful children and family devotion. Meanwhile, the identity theft case made its way through the system. Isabella and Oliver did not go to jail, but they were both charged with misdemeanors and fined. It wasn't enough to put them behind jail, but it did give them both criminal records. The district attorney was not interested in pursuing criminal charges because it was a family affair, but he was also not going to let them off the hook. They offered a plea bargain with minor charges in exchange for complete cooperation and restitution. Given the family situation, the DA stated that it was not worthwhile to waste resources on a full-fledged felony trial. The airline security report cemented the agreement. Emirates handles passenger identification very seriously, and the evidence of Oliver's misuse of my boarding card was damning. The TSA agent who handled Oliver's boarding was also investigated. It turned out that he was Oliver's college acquaintance who assisted him in bypassing usual security protocols. He lost his job, and as a result of the event, Emirates tightened its ID verification procedures. Oliver received a misdemeanor since he claimed he was just using the boarding pass I gave him, and the TSA agent, his friend, confirmed this lying. The agent took the brunt of the criticism for bypassing proper verification procedures. Oliver received a $5,000 fine and 200 hours of community service. Isabella received a somewhat lower penalty of $2,500 and 100 hours because Oliver was the one who actually boarded the plane. The DA stated that the texts alone were insufficient to prove Isabella knew Oliver was intending to impersonate me. She denied involvement, and Oliver took the blame. She and Oliver were both sentenced to 1 year of probation. Criminal records had immediate implications. Isabella was turned down for a job at a marketing firm after a background check revealed it. She tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. But fraud convictions are not trivial matters for businesses that handle financial information. Oliver's phony consultancy firm suffered an even greater blow. As word spread about his criminal background, the Fortune 500 connections he was always boasted about became silent. It turns out that respectable businesses are not eager to cooperate with someone who has been convicted of fraud. Who knew? It has been a year since the Dubai accident. I have not heard from my immediate relatives since the restraining order was served. The silence has been very peaceful. I kept the property, found dependable tenants who paid the entire amount on time, and used the extra money to fund my hobbies and investments rather than fueling adult dependence. I took advantage of my newfound financial freedom to go on my own vacation. 2 weeks in Costa Rica, surfing and trekking. I didn't share a single photo on social media. I simply enjoyed it for what it was. My cousin Laura visited a few times this year, keeping me up to date on family turmoil. My parents had moved from my aunt's house to another relative's, and then another, each time burning bridges. They had taken out loans from various family members, pledging to repay them as soon as their condition straightened. None of the loans had been repaid. Most of the extended family had cut relations with them after discovering they were being exploited as temporary ATMs, a job I was all too familiar with. Oliver abandoned Isabella around 2 months after the eviction, going on to date the daughter of a local restaurant owner. Isabella was not doing well. She had lost a lot of money on an online business venture that turned out to be a hoax. Oliver's business drive undoubtedly served as an inspiration. She'd started drinking regularly and was living with roommates who were about to push her out for failing to pay her portion of the utilities. My father's knee troubles had deteriorated to the point that he required surgery, but Medicare would only cover a portion of it. My mother was working part-time at a craft store while still investing money in her failed candle business. She even set up a GoFundMe for my father's surgery, which raised $340 in 3 months. I stopped by one night after a few sodas and donated exactly $1 just so my name would appear on the donor list. Laura claimed that my name had become connected with treachery and family talks. They had entirely reinvented history. Now I was the villain, having abandoned them without notice after years of their assistance in advancing my career. Me? I had moved on with my life. At work, I was promoted to senior project manager, where I oversee all commercial projects worth more than $750,000. I started dating Kristen, a civil engineer who does not believe that family is a blank check to be cashed at will. I expanded my investment portfolio and even began training a handful of younger guys at work about financial literacy. They eventually tried to reach out again. Mom texted me from a new number, wondering if we could meet. Of course, I agreed. I wanted to see for myself how terribly they had fouled up. They came over and knocked on my door. My parents and Isabella stood on the porch, looking as if they had aged a decade in a year. "Thank you for seeing us," my father began. I nodded and said nothing. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," my mother added. "About everything that happened in Dubai, about how we treated you." Isabella sobbed quietly, and Oliver fled when things became difficult. "You were right about him all along. What do you want?" I asked, going to the chase. Over the last year, I've built a fairly reliable detector. They exchanged glances. My mother said, "We want to reconcile. To be a family again." My father admitted, "We need a place to stay. Just till we get back on our feet." Same phrase but different day. Part of me wondered whether they realized they were repeating the same line they used 4 years ago when this whole thing began. "You have disowned me. We are no longer family, remember?" My mother reached for my hand. I moved it away. She said, "Please." We felt hurt and outraged. "We did not mean it." "No," I responded. "You intended it at the time. You truly believed that others would continue to support you. You meant it till you ran out of family to feed off of." My father was perplexed, as if he didn't understand why his apology script wasn't working. In his opinion, expressing sorry was always sufficient to reset everything. It never dawned on him that some damage cannot be reversed with words. "I'm not your backup plan," I added. "And I'm certainly not going to let you move back into my property after the damage you caused." Isabella's expression soured. "This is still about your foolish trip, right? We both paid for it. I lost my job due to the charges you filed." I looked at her immediately. "You were fired because you stole someone else's identity. Now you understand what it's like when doors close because of something on your record." After several minutes of back and forth, they gave up hope. As they were about to go, I stopped them. I gave my father an envelope. Inside was $3,000. "This is for your surgery," I stated plainly. They looked at the envelope, then at me, with hope in their eyes. "This is not a reconciliation," I continued. "We are closing our accounts. I will not have your health issues on my conscience. Nothing more." My father's hand trembled when he accepted the packet. "Thank you, son," he muttered. Don't call me that, I replied, opening the door for them. I watched them walk towards their car, heads down. On the way home, they'd undoubtedly convinced themselves that this was the first step towards re-entering my life. They would be wrong. Still waiting for Oliver's lawyer's call. Give me access to your accounts or get out of my house. So I did both and sued him. Now my father is serving 18 months and owes me $180,000. I, a 28-year-old male, went from a family ATM to the guy who nuked their entire existence and walked away with no shits given. Meet my family. Adam, a 52-year-old wannabe dictator, and his 25-year-old golden boy offspring, Liam. These two idiots transformed our house into their personal kingdom, with me as the peasant who funded their lifestyle. Adam used to work in construction until my mother Marina relocated to Germany for a nurse position when I was 16. When the Euro checks arrived, this guy quickly hung up his tool belt. What's his logic? Why break my back when Marina has us covered from overseas? Adam's decision to become professionally unemployed is burnt into my memory. At 2 p.m., I arrived home from school to see him ceremoniously discarding his work boots in the trash while opening a celebration drink. On a Tuesday. Your old guy is retired, Lucas, he declared as if he had won the lotto rather than decided to become a parasite. It's time for you to step up and provide for this family. I was freaking years old, but Adam had already determined that my future would be spent funding his grandiose fantasies. But Adam wasn't content with being sluggish. He needed to maintain control. Every household decision went through him. What we ate, which stations we watched, who could drive the car, and when the heat was switched on. Small dick energy compensates by micromanaging everything he touches. Then there's Liam, my younger brother, and Adam's mini-me. This guy was 25, but he acted like he was 15, complete with the belief that the world owed him everything. While I was working factory shifts, Liam was honing his Xbox abilities and demonstrating his ability to be a whole person to anyone who advised him to obtain a job. He worked around 15 hours a week at a GameStop copycat, blowing his whole paycheck on energy drinks, marijuana, and whatever new sneakers would let him pretend he wasn't a loser. He spent the rest of his time sitting in his room, playing Call of Duty and talking to 12-year-olds online. He would stay awake till 4 a.m., screaming at his gaming headset, then sleeping till 2 p.m., and whining about being fatigued by his rigorous schedule of doing nothing constructive. Adam rationalized this as Liam discovering his passion, as if he were a professional disappointment on a genuine career path. Our house was a dilapidated ranch-style structure with a sinking foundation and pipes that sounded like dead animals every time someone flushed. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and the persistent odor of Adam's marls combined with Liam's energy drink farts. Adam governed the realm from his throne. A worn-out recliner with permanent ass grooves. From there, he'd yell instructions, criticize everything I did, and constantly remind me that I owed him for providing a roof over my head. The worst part was that I believed him. When Mom went, she grabbed me aside and said, "Take care of your father and brother, Lucas. You're the man of the house now. Don't let them down." Adam ensured that I understand the hierarchy. He was the king, Liam was the prince, and I was the court jester, whose responsibility was to pay for everyone's enjoyment. When I suggested Liam obtain a real job or Adam contribute something, Adam reminded me who was the head of the household. His favorite statement was, "You live under my roof, you follow my rules." Never mind that I was paying for the roof, the regulations and everything else that kept their miserable lives going. But he had a knack of making you feel ridiculous for demanding even basic respect. He would twist every conversation such that you were the problem. He understood just what buttons to press to make me feel guilty about desiring anything for myself. And Liam, who had learned a bit from his teacher, developing his own ability to make any request sound absurd. I spent my early 20s believing that sacrificing everything for these two was normal. That family meant becoming everyone else's solution to the difficulties they caused. My desire to keep some of what I earned made me greedy. It does not. And they were going to learn their lesson the hard way. At 19, I got a job at a metal fabrication facility about 30 minutes outside of town, 8 hours of cutting, steel, welding brackets, and progressively ruining my hearing at a plant that appeared to have not been modernized since the Carter era. However, the pay was consistent. And someone needed to save Adam's kingdom from collapsing. The plant was operated by Frank, an old-school hard-ass who'd been there when it first started. He pulled me aside the first week on the job and said, "Kid, I can tell the difference between guys who work and guys who just show up. Which one are you going to be?" I told him I needed the job too much to mess about with. He nodded and said, "Good, because the guys who just show up don't last here, and I can spot them from across the floor. He became my unofficial mentor, teaching me that respect in the workplace was won through performance, not begging or playing politics. Every 2 weeks Adam would wait for me with his hand out, not asking, but demanding. He had cornered me after I received my first salary and explained how things worked in his home. "Your money goes into the family pot," he remarked, as if explaining simple math to a youngster. "I select how it is spent: rent, utilities, groceries, everything. You want to spend money and ask me for it. Ask him for my own money that I earned." Adam had this ritual around payday that still makes my blood boil thinking about it. He'd position himself at the kitchen table with a calculator, legal pad, and a smug expression like he was some kind of financial genius. "Let's see what the family earned this week," he'd say, like he'd contributed a single cent. Then he'd itemize every expense, real and imaginary, while I stood there like a kid getting lectured about allowance. Rent, utilities, groceries, miscellaneous household expenses, which somehow always included his beer money and Liam's most recent gaming purchase, but he wasn't just taking my money. In the meantime, Liam was given an allowance as if he were 12 years old, and he was in charge of the bank account where my checks were deposited, the groceries we bought, and whether or not I could afford to replace my work boots, which had holes in them. Every weekend, Adam would give him $50 for being a good kid, while I had to justify buying soap. Liam's contribution to the household was limited to taking out the trash if Adam specifically instructed him to do so. Cooking, cleaning, and yard work were all my responsibility. Liam was 25 years old. By then most people had figured out how to wash dishes, and the disparity in how Adam treated us became a daily humiliation. Liam could sleep until noon, leave dirty dishes everywhere, and treat the house like his personal frat house. Whereas I was held to military standards, and I had a curfew at the age of 22. While Liam could stumble home at 3 a.m., wrecking cheap weed without consequences, Adam would explain when I pointed out the hypocrisy. "You're the responsible one. Act like it." Translation: Liam gets to be a perpetual teenager while you get to be everyone's parent. Weekends were the worst, because Adam's crew would show up. A group of unemployed middle-aged men who'd turned day drinking into an Olympic sport would park themselves in our backyard, drain a case of drinks, and solve all the world's problems with the wisdom of Budweiser. I'd come home from overtime shifts to find these champions of society passed out in lawn chairs, while Adam held court like some discount Tony Soprano. Liam would occasionally join them, attempting to act like one of the guys. There's nothing worse than watching a 25-year-old try to impress his father's unemployed drinking mates with stories about his latest gaming feats. Adam had a way of making me feel bad for desiring anything, and he'd continuously weaponize Mom's promise. "Your mother trusted you to take care of us. Are you going to let her down? Are you going to be that kind of son?" Liam learned to play the same game. Whenever I asked him to contribute something, anything, and he complained to Adam about me being mean or picking on him, Adam would immediately take his side, reminding me that Liam was going through a difficult time and needed support, not pressure. The guy lived on entry, ate food he didn't pay for, and had no responsibilities beyond himself. It was a real hardship, but I kept grinding, telling myself it was only temporary, that eventually Adam would realize he needed to contribute, or Liam would grow up and get a real job, and that my sacrifice meant something. What I didn't realize was that Adam was perfectly content with our arrangement. He had a live-in ATM who paid all the bills and never complained. Why would he want that to change? Well, he was about to discover that every ATM has a withdrawal limit. 3 years into the manufacturing horror, management observed something unusual. I genuinely gave up on doing a decent job. While my coworkers were perfecting the art of looking busy, I was fixing problems, streamlining processes, and generally acting like someone who understood that work quality matters. They promoted me to floor supervisor, which resulted in a small pay increase, but more importantly, it got me noticed by the front office guys who made real decisions. It turned out that I had a natural talent for logistics and organization. Frank was the first to notice my potential. One day, he took me into his office and said, "Lucas, you see things other people miss. Yesterday you caught the shipping issue that would have cost us $50,000. Most guys would have simply signed the paperwork and left it be someone else's problem." Frank introduced me to the operations manager, who began giving me special projects that showcased my analytical skills. Within 2 years, they promoted me to operations management, then supply chain coordination, and finally regional logistics, each with a higher salary and more respect from people who were not related to me. In 6 years, I went from cutting metal for peanuts to managing multi-million-dollar contracts. My salary increased by a factor of 10, but Adam and Liam had no idea. I'd leave the house in the same beat-up work clothes, drive to a gas station 3 meters away, and change into business attire in the bathroom. My factory had apparently started requiring office meetings. Adam's narcissistic mind couldn't bear the thought of his employee's son becoming more successful than he had ever been, so I continued to hand over the same amount every payday, which was the equivalent of my original factory wages. That explains why I was dressed in khakis rather than steel-toed boots. Adam would still sit on his throne, demanding his tribute with the same entitled attitude. "Come on, Lucas. Don't make me wait for the household money," and I'd hand it over with a straight face while mentally calculating how much was accumulating in my secret war chest. By the 5th year, I had enough saved to buy a house outright. By year 6, I could have lived comfortably for 3 years without working at all. The hardest part wasn't hiding the money, it was watching these two waste what I gave them. Adam's drinking budget alone could have paid for a decent vacation, and Liam's monthly allowance was enough to cover some people's grocery bills. My real job became increasingly demanding and rewarding, while at home, I was still being lectured about fiscal responsibility by a man whose greatest financial achievement was successfully cashing unemployment checks. The cognitive dissonance was mind-bending, and I'd close a deal that would save the company $300,000 per year, only to come home to Adam explaining why I couldn't afford better work boots. Adam's control obsession made everything easier to hide. He never questioned where I worked or what I did as long as the money kept coming in. He saw me as the same broke kid cutting metal for minimum wage. Liam was even more oblivious. He believed that money appeared magically, as if it were delivered by the same fairy that cleaned his room and did his laundry. Adam just saw it as me being away from the house, which meant less interference with his daily routine of drinking and playing king of the castle. "Don't forget to call and check in," he'd say, as if I were a teenager going to summer camp. The idea that someone had to earn it was completely foreign to him. I began traveling for work, visiting suppliers, managing contracts, and attending industry conferences. Neither of them had any idea that the guy they treated like hired help was actually making more money than Adam had ever seen in his life. But I kept playing the role. I kept pretending to be broke while building my escape fund. I kept acting like their financial status while secretly planning my independence. The account kept growing. 6 figures. Then I was 7, and for the first time since Mom left, I had hope. Real hope, backed by real money, that I could actually get away from these toxic people and live for myself. What I didn't realize was that my little secret was about to explode on March 12, 2024, the date my carefully constructed double life went nuclear. I had just closed a massive contract that would save the company about $800,000 per year, and my bonus from that deal alone was more than Adam had made in the last 5 years combined. I printed the direct deposit confirmation to file with my other records, but I made a fatal mistake. I left it on my kitchen counter. Liam found it the next morning while scavenging for breakfast money. "Holy Lucas!" He screamed loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. "Look at that freaking number." Adam came running like Liam had discovered oil in the backyard. When he saw that deposit slip, his face went through about 6 different emotions in 10 seconds. The silence that followed Liam's discovery was deafening. Adam just stood there holding that piece of paper like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Liam was practically vibrating with excitement, probably already mentally spending money he didn't own. "Dude, this changes everything," Liam remarked, his voice trembling with greed. "We're freaking wealthy. This is what they're paying you," Adam exclaimed, clutching the paper like it was evidence of my sins against the family. "And you've been giving us the same amount for years?" I tried to stay calm. "That money is mine, Dad. I deserved it. You two bring nothing to this house other than drama and bills." Adam's face turned that special shade of red that he got when someone dared to question his authority. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. This is my house, and I decide how money gets spent here." Liam jumped in with his usual brilliance. "We saw how much you make, Lucas. You've been holding out on us. I want a car, a nice one, and my own place. You can afford it now." The entitlement was breathtaking, but Adam had bigger plans. He sat back down in his throne and laid out his new world order with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Here's how this is going to work, Lucas. You give me access to all of your accounts from now on, and I'll manage the money properly. Make sure Liam has everything he needs for his future, and make sure I can enjoy my retirement properly. You'll get an allowance like Liam, maybe $500 a week if you're good, $500 a week out of my 6-figure salary." "Another thing," Adam added, warming up to his dictatorship fantasy. Adam's demands revealed the depth of his delusion. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, power, and his desperate need to maintain his position as the alpha in a pack where he'd never actually been the strongest. You'll get a local job where I can keep an eye on you, and you won't be getting ideas above your station. I've been too lenient with you, and clearly, you can't be trusted to make good decisions on your own. The irony was staggering. The man who hadn't made a good decision since the Clinton administration was going to manage my career. That's when I started laughing. Absolutely not, I said. I'm done with this, I'm moving out. Adam's face turned from red to purple. What the hell are you? When I went to my room to start packing, Adam grabbed my shoulder and whirled me around, and before I could react, his fist hit my jaw so hard that it snapped my head sideways. I lurched backward, tasting blood, while Adam hovered over me like a trailer park tyrant. You live in my house. You follow my rules, he snarled, flexing his hand. Now get your ass in that kitchen, and we'll discuss your new budget like civilized people. Liam was waiting in the doorway with this horrible smile on his face. Maybe next time you'll listen when Dad's talking, Liam added, clearly enjoying the spectacle. When I touched my jaw and felt the swelling begin, something inside me snapped. I looked at these two people who thought violence was an acceptable way to deal with my desire for basic human dignity. Okay, I said, slowly standing up. You want to do this the hard way? Let us do it the hard way. In the evening, I drove straight to the police station with a fat lip and a jaw that felt like it had been hit with a crowbar. I filed a formal assault complaint against Adam, complete with photos of my injuries and a detailed statement about the financial abuse and control. The cops were surprisingly helpful, and they sent 2 officers to arrest Adam that day. Liam called me while Adam was being processed, screaming about how I was destroying the family and demanding that I drop the charges. I hung up on him and blocked his number. Adam spent the night in county jail before making bail, and when he got out, he called me from his lawyer's office. Drop the charges, Lucas, he said, trying to sound reasonable rather than desperate. This is a family business. We don't discuss family business in court. Nope, I responded. You wanted to play dictator, now you get to play defendant. That's when his mask fully slipped, and the calm, rational voice fled, replaced by sheer wrath. You think you can ruin me? I made you. I hung up and called my lawyer. It was time to see how Adam liked playing games with someone who could afford better legal representation than the public defender he'd managed to scrape together. Drop those charges or you'll regret it. The assault charge was only the beginning. Adam was about to learn that threatening the guy who'd been secretly documenting financial abuse for years was a very, very bad idea. Adam's arrest was just the beginning of a month-long legal chess match in which I had every advantage, and he was playing with checkers. See, Adam made a critical mistake. My lawyer, Allison Chen, was a pit bull in a tailored suit who specialized in family law and domestic abuse cases. When I showed her my documentation of 12 years of financial control and abuse, her eyes lit up. He had no idea he was threatening someone with serious resources and nothing left to lose. Allison's thoroughness was both impressive and terrifying as she dissected Adam's financial history like a forensic accountant looking for war criminals. Your father is looking at more than just assault charges, she said, spreading out my bank records and Adam's financial history. Financial abuse, theft, and intimidation can all complicate his life. Your father has been living above his means for 12 years with no reportable income, she explained, pulling out spreadsheets that made Adam's napkin budgeting look like crayon drawings. The IRS takes a dim view of people who live like kings while claiming to be paupers. We're not just going to destroy him legally, we're going to financially eviscerate him. The assault case was airtight. We looked at hospital photos, police reports, and witness statements from neighbors who had heard Adam yell threats, but we went deeper. Has he ever filed taxes on the money you've been giving him? She asked, which made me laugh. Adam filing taxes. The guy who thought the IRS was a government conspiracy? Never. While Adam was dealing with his criminal accusations, I had another issue. He's been treating it as if it were a gift for the past 12 years, which is a large amount of tax evasion. I believe we should talk to some of my federal friends about this. Liam, this little had decided to play enforcer for his daddy, and he was about to learn why that was a mistake. The harassment started the day after Adam's arrest. Liam would drive by my new apartment at all hours, sitting in his car like some discount private investigator, and he'd follow me to work, the grocery store, and even the gym. Then came the texts, hundreds of them. You're dead when this is over, brother. Snitches get stitches. Dad was going to make you pay for this. And you better watch your back. He was a typical tough guy who had never thrown a punch in his life, but he was only getting started. He began showing up at my business, demanding to see me, and security had to remove him off the property twice. My boss, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who'd built her career in male-dominated industries, took one look at the situation and said, "Someone's trying to intimidate my best logistics manager over my dead body." She immediately involved corporate security and legal, documenting every incident with the precision of someone who has dealt with workplace harassment before. "We protect our people here," Patricia told me, "and we don't negotiate with wannabe thugs who believe they can threaten our employees." Having corporate backing felt like being handed a loaded weapon. That's when my cousin Paul entered the picture, and thank God he did. Paul was 2 years older than me, built like a linebacker, and had the kind of dark sense of humor that comes from being a paramedic who'd seen every form of human stupidity imaginable. We'd always been close, but he lived 3 hours away, so I hadn't seen him much during the Adam years. When I phoned him to explain what was going on, his response was exactly what I needed to hear. "Wait a minute, Paul. Your sperm donor punched you for wanting to keep your own money, and now his other spawn is playing gangster. Jesus, Lucas, it's like white trash bingo over there." Paul drove down the next weekend, saw Liam sitting in his car outside my apartment, and knocked on his window. "Hey, Discount Batman," Paul said as Liam rolled down the window. "Remember me? Your cousin who spent 4 years in the Marines before becoming a paramedic? You know what I learned in those jobs?" Liam shook his head, probably terrified. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop this stalker, or I'm going to show you what a true threat looks like." Liam drove away and didn't return for 3 days. I know how to make someone disappear without leaving a trace, and I know how to keep them alive while doing so. Paul helped me document every harassment incident, every threatening text, and every time Liam showed up where he wasn't supposed to be. "Your brother's building our restraining order case for us," Paul said, photographing Liam's latest threatening message. "The kid's too stupid to realize he's creating evidence." He was right. Liam's escalation was perfect for what happened next. A restraining order that would legally require both Adam and Liam to stay away from me, my home, and my workplace. The hearing was beautiful. Adam showed up in a cheap suit, probably borrowed from his lawyer, trying to look respectable, while Liam wore a hoodie and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. My documentation was overwhelming. After months of threatening texts, images of Liam stalking me, and witness statements from neighbors and co-workers, the judge granted the restraining order in just 5 minutes. "Adam and Mr. Liam," the judge remarked, looking at them as if he'd stumbled into something terrible. "You are not to contact the petitioner. No phone calls, no texts, and no showing up at his home or workplace." Adam's look was comical as he was told by a judge that he couldn't even text me, despite the fact that he had spent years controlling every aspect of my life. The best part was yet to come. Allison had been preparing her case against Adam, and she was ready to use it. "Your father's trial is next month," she told me after the restraining order hearing. "Assault, financial abuse, tax evasion." Adam was about to learn that threatening someone with resources and legal representation was not the same as bullying a broke teenager who thought he had no options. Adam's trial was everything I had hoped for and more. Allison built a comprehensive case that exposed Adam for what he was: a financial predator who had spent over a decade stealing from his own son. It was better than Christmas morning to watch this would-be dictator squirm in a defendant's chair while a prosecutor systematically destroyed his life. The prosecution laid it out in detail. 12 years of taking my entire wage while providing nothing. 12 years of financial control and manipulation, and 12 years of tax evasion on money he'd practically stolen from me. Adam's public attorney appeared to want to hide under the table. The prosecution's case was a masterclass in destruction, with bank records proving Adam's complete lack of income, documentation of his unreported lifestyle, witness testimony about his control tactics, and recorded threats made from jail. The best moment came when they played the recorded phone call from jail, where Adam threatened me for pressing charges. His voice was clear as day, promising to make me regret seeking justice. "I made you, and I can unmake you just as easily." The jury's faces said it all. 12 people looking at Adam like he was something they'd scrape off their shoes. Liam sat in the gallery trying to look supportive but mostly succeeding in looking like he needed to change his pants. Paul sat next to me, occasionally whispering commentary that made it hard not to laugh. "Your dad looks like he's about to himself," he observed during a particularly brutal cross-examination. Adam took the stand in his own defense, which was an epic mistake. During cross-examination, he attempted to excuse 12 years of financial abuse as teaching responsibility and claimed that striking me was simply a father punishing his son. The prosecutor was ruthless. "Mr. Adam, your son was 28 when you hit him. In what world is that a proper discipline?" He was showing disdain. Living in my place, following my rules. He paid the mortgage on your property. Your rules are supported by his salary. Adam's lawyer objected, but the harm had been done. Adam had essentially admitted to financial abuse in open court. The jury reached their conclusion in less than 2 hours, guilty on all charges. Adam's sentencing occurred 3 weeks later. Allison had written a victim impact statement outlining exactly how much 12 years of abuse had cost me. Not just financial, but also emotional and psychological. Adam was sentenced to 18 months in state jail, 5 years probation, and a court order to pay me $180,000 in restitution, estimated as the amount he took over the years in excess of his typical household contribution. The true cherry on top was the tax evasion conviction. Over the previous 12 years, the IRS had been particularly interested in Adam's undeclared income. They slammed him with past taxes, fines, and interest beyond his ability to pay. The IRS agent described the problem. Mr. Adam owes approximately $347,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest, she stated, looking through his file like it was a grocery list. Given his current financial situation and earning potential, we'll be garnishing any income he receives for the rest of his natural life. She looked up from her paperwork, smiling slightly. Mr. Adam will make payments till his death. Liam's response to his father's conviction was to escalate the harassment. The restraining order did not appear to matter much to him. He began utilizing burner phones to send threatening texts and asked his gaming mates to leave anonymous voicemails. Paul and I documented everything: photographs, recordings, and witness statements. Liam was creating a compelling case for felony harassment and stalking. The second restraining order hearing was even more positive than the first. Liam showed up without a lawyer, representing himself with the legal knowledge of a ham sandwich. Liam addressed the judge directly. "My brother ruined our family. My father is in prison because of him. I have the right to feel angry." The judge looked at him as if he had admitted to war crimes. "You have the right to feel angry, Mr. Liam. You do not have the right to stalk and threaten others." He was charged with criminal stalking, sentenced to 6 months in county jail, and issued an extended restraining order that would last 5 years. But Paul made the nicest observation as we left the courthouse. "You know what the funny part is?" he went on. "These idiots could have just let you leave quietly. Could have found jobs and figured out how to be adults. Instead, they chose to end up destroyed." He wasn't mistaken. Adam's prison commissary account was garnished monthly to pay for his reparation and whatever work Liam was able to sustain. Watching these two figure out what penalties meant was worth every dime I spent on legal bills. But the finest part was still to come. 2 years later, I'm writing from the deck of my new home. This is not an apartment, but a house. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a connected garage, and a backyard with only my own drink bottles. The consequences of Adam and Liam's legal ruin were even more pleasant than I had anticipated. Adam completed his whole 18 months and returned to find that his kingdom had been repossessed. It turns out that banks become irritated when you can't make mortgage payments from prison. Adam's release from prison was an example of poetic justice. I heard through the grapevine that he came out intending to recover his kingdom, only to find the house in foreclosure and Liam living in a studio apartment smelling of failure and ramen noodles. Adam's empire fell apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane when he lost his live-in ATM. Last I heard, he was renting a room from one of his drinking cronies and working part-time at a hardware shop, giving the IRS the majority of his paycheck. Liam hopped around couch surfing and homeless shelters before landing a job at a car wash. His gaming equipment was sold to cover court bills, and his hopes of surviving off his brother's fame faded faster than his KD ratio. The restitution payments continue, totaling approximately $800 each month between the two of them. It's like receiving a bonus check from the cosmos for standing up to bullies. My cousin Paul became more than a backup. He became my preferred family. When family relatives revealed their true colors, he was there to support me. We still text every day. He also pays me a visit every few months to ensure that I don't become a hermit. What do I enjoy most about this situation? Paul mentioned this during his previous visit, when we were drinking on my balcony and grilling steaks. Adam believed he was the castle's monarch, but he was only a parasite. Parasites die when they lose their host. He had a point. Adam's entire identity revolved around dominating me. When that control vanished, he had nothing. Liam's identification was even more terrible. The golden youngster who never had to grow up since his father always took care of everything. Prison and real life struck him like a freight train. However, their destruction was not the finest form of revenge. It was my success. I am now a regional director for the organization, overseeing operations in 8 states. The salary is absurd. The benefits are ridiculous. And, Rather than fleeing poisonous situations, I'm dating Allison, the lawyer who helped wreck Adam's case. Aside from our similar fondness for legal retribution, we discovered we had a lot in common. She has her own career, her own home, and a therapy-approved method of dealing with toxic family members. She understood boundaries, supported autonomy, and never wanted access to my finances or attempted to influence my decisions. During one of our early dates, she reminded me that healthy relationships are about addition rather than subtraction. Good partners improve your life while preserving your freedom. The restraining orders remain in place for 3 more years. There was no contact, no communication, and no one showed up in my life. It's as if there's a legal force field surrounding everything I've produced. I occasionally meet people from the old neighborhood who know Adam and Liam. They frequently start with something like, "I heard what happened to your family," followed by pity or judgment. The judgment doesn't concern me anymore. Anyone who believes I should have continued to enable 2 grown men who refuse to care for themselves can join Adam and Liam in the ranks of those whose opinions are irrelevant. Adam and Liam decided to be parasites rather than individuals. When their host eventually said no more, they chose violence over self-improvement. When violence failed, they chose harassment instead of facing the consequences. Every decision they made was wrong. And me. I choose to create a life in which toxic individuals cannot reach me, and my success is mine to enjoy, rather than being redistributed to people who never deserved it. Adam is presumably eating prison cuisine and planning his next appeal. Liam is probably scrubbing vehicles and fantasizing about his great days of Xbox achievements. And I am living proof that the best family is often the one you choose rather than the one you are born into. If you're reading this and it sounds familiar, know why. You have options, and you have the power to say screw it and construct something. At 3 a.m., my dad broke into my apartment and whispered, "Michael says you're next." I set up cameras and sent the footage to HR. Every year on March 22nd, my family celebrated what we called Foundation Day. It wasn't like other family rituals, which involve photo albums and good memories. At precisely 6 p.m., we'd all go to the basement. No lights, no electricity, just a single candle. According to Dad, it was the day our ancestors established our family homestead. After surviving a harsh winter in 1874, we paid tribute to them by recreating their misery. Dad told us that our forefathers huddled in caves for warmth, so we huddled on rotting wool blankets in our basement for 18 hours till midday the next day. I despised every second of it. The rules were severe. Nobody could exit the circle. We ate cold canned beans and shared a jug of water. If you needed the restroom, you held it. Dad stated that our predecessors did not have comfort such as plumbing when they established our family history. My sister Emma was often crying, but Dad stroked her hair and told her she was commemorating great-great-grandmother Marsh, who had lost 3 toes to frostbite. As a child, I was afraid. I had sobbed the entire time. But Dad explained that was the point. To appreciate being alive, you had to experience fear. Every year, he shared the same stories. How the Marsh family persevered when others failed. How they stayed together in the darkness and came out stronger. He sometimes counted aloud. 14, 15, 16. They claimed it was the hours they spent in their final sanctuary before spring arrived. When I became older, I began to doubt it. Why did we do it? Why were we celebrating our ancestors in such an unusual manner? I remember when I was 15 my friend Jake invited me to his family reunion, but I declined because it was almost Foundation Day. When I revealed our basement routine, his face turned pale. "Dude, that is seriously messed up," he said. That night I was unable to sleep. Jake's reaction repeated on repeat in my thoughts. That's when I started to notice things. How Mom's hands shook as she packed the beans. How our family had no images or paperwork from these alleged relatives. When I wanted to see family records for a school project, Dad became enraged. Said I was demeaning our heritage. However, there was terror in his eyes. Real panic, like if I had threatened to burn down the house. The worst part was watching Dad on Foundation Day. Normal Dad laughed around while watching football. Foundation Day. Dad sat rigid in the darkness, speaking into the walls. His breathing would become shallow, and he'd hold the candle as if it would vanish. I once heard him utter, "I'm sorry," over and over until his voice became hoarse. My senior year, I tried to skip it, telling them I had SAT prep that couldn't be rescheduled. Dad lost it and grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "You don't understand what happens if we break the chain," he said. His eyes are terrified. 18 hours. That's what we owe. That's what I owe. Mom took him from me, but I could tell she was crying. Not angry tears, but scared tears. The kind that made my stomach drop. I went down to the basement anyway because Dad looked so broken, but the obsession haunted me. Who were these Marsh ancestors really? And why all the secrecy? Last year, I got the courage to do real research, going to the library and searching genealogy records. On March 22, 1994, a boy named Timothy Marsh, my father, was rescued from a collapsed parking garage after being trapped for 18 hours. There was no mention of a Marsh family founding anything in 1874, or of cave survivors. According to the article, he was playing with his twin brother when the structure collapsed. He survived in an air pocket for exactly 18 hours, dehydrated and hypothermic, but alive. I took photos with my phone, hands shaking, and that night, I read through everything I'd captured. The rescue worker called it a miracle because air pockets that small usually run out of oxygen within hours. His twin brother Michael was also found. He'd been dead for hours. It all connected. There were no founding ancestors. The Marsh family were not pioneers. They were my father and his deceased twin. Foundation Day wasn't about celebrating lineage. It was about the day my father was rescued from the debris. The beans. What a hungry youngster dreams of. The basement, his collapsed concrete tomb, the photo. I bet if I looked closer, I'd see two little boys, not pioneers, but the final line of the article made my blood run cold. The rescue worker mentioned that when they found my father, he was talking to someone who wasn't there, making promises, and he'd been counting 1, 2, 3 all the way to 18. I sat in my apartment staring at that newspaper photo on my phone. Foundation Day was in 2 weeks. My hands trembled as I zoomed in on the grainy image of 6-year-old Timothy Marsh being pulled from the rubble. The rescue worker's face showed relief mixed with horror, and behind him, I could make out a small covered stretcher. My phone buzzed. Dad. The text made my stomach clench. Foundation Day preparations. You're coming home to help? I couldn't respond. My mind raced through 30 years of basement rituals, of Dad whispering apologies to empty corners, of never-ending counting. 18 hours. Always 18 hours. The knock came at 3 a.m., and I jolted awake on my couch, the newspaper article still glowing on my laptop screen. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and I saw Dad among the people. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth like he was being chased. I cracked the door open, keeping the chain on. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and his shirt was inside out. He pressed his face close to the gap. You've been looking into things you shouldn't. My blood went cold and I tried to keep my voice steady. Dad, it's 3 a.m. The librarian called me. My phone began to ring, and Emma's name appeared on the screen. I had forgotten how small our town was, how everyone knew everyone. Mrs. Henderson. We went to high school. Together said you were in there looking at old newspapers and asking about the Marsh family. At 3:15 a.m., Dad's gaze was drawn to the phone. I answered it with trembling hands. Emma was crying, her words coming out in hiccups. Dad had arrived at her apartment 20 minutes earlier, knocking on her door, demanding to know if I'd spoken with her about family business. Her roommate had threatened to contact the police before leaving. Emma, I'm so sorry, I managed to say while Dad stared through the door crack. What's going on? She sobbed harder. He kept asking about Foundation Day, and if you'd said anything about changing things. He looked insane. Dad pushed harder on the door. Let me in, we need to communicate as a family. After I calmed Emma down and promised to call her in the morning, Dad eventually departed, but something felt off. I strolled through my apartment, checking windows and closets, and nothing seemed out of place until I reached for my keys on the kitchen counter. They weren't where I'd left them, they were on the coffee table, right next to my laptop. The newspaper photo was gone from my phone, not just closed, but completely erased from my photo library. My laptop's browsing history had been cleared. Of course, he had a key. When I moved in 2 years ago, he insisted on having one for emergencies. At 6 a.m., my mother texted me, "Please come home. Your father hasn't slept in 3 days. He keeps talking about protecting the family." I'm scared. I drove home in a daze. The house looked normal from the outside. Same faded blue siding, same crooked mailbox. But Dad's car was parked at an angle across the lawn, as if he'd been in too much of a hurry to use the driveway. I found him in the basement, where he sat in the exact spot where we always did Foundation Day, cross-legged on the moldy blankets. In broad daylight, I could see things I'd never noticed during our candlelit rituals. Scratch marks on the concrete walls, dozens of tally marks carved into the floor, all in groups of 18. He was talking to the corner, his voice gentle and urgent. I know. I know, but they're trying to stop it. They don't understand what I promised, Dad. He turned slowly, his face lighting up with an expression that made my skin crawl. Relief. Michael adds, "You're going to wreck everything." The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael, his twin brother, dead for 30 years, but apparently still holding conversations in our basement. Mom appeared at the top of the stairs, gesturing frantically for me to come up. I backed away slowly, not wanting to turn my back on Dad. He'd already returned to his conversation with the corner. In the kitchen, Mom's hands shook as she poured coffee. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. She looked like she had aged 5 years in the week since I'd last seen her. "How long has he been like this?" I asked, looking toward the basement door. "It gets worse every year." After each foundation day, I stopped pressing her, lips together. "You know what? I crushed sleeping pills in his food for about a week after that. It's the only way to get him to sleep." The confession came out in a whisper. "Otherwise he stays awake, counting, always counting to 18. Mom, I know what it is." Her voice turned sharp. "You think I don't know. But what am I supposed to do? He's my husband, Emma's father. Your father." Emma arrived an hour later looking as exhausted as the rest of us. Dad had called her 14 times since leaving her apartment. She showed me the voicemails, his voice getting progressively more agitated, talking about family loyalty and keeping promises. "He made me promise," Emma said quietly while Mom was in the bathroom. "Last year after Foundation Day. What's really going on with Dad's counting in these basement conversations? I'm curious why he needs everyone else present if it's about his personal pain. He doesn't seem to be talking anything deeper about those 18 hours in the rubble. He took me aside and made me vow that if something happened to him, I would continue doing it. Keep the tradition alive. Emma, you cannot. I understand." She wiped her eyes, but you couldn't see his face. He seemed desperate. He claimed Michael was counting on us. I remembered reading in the media about 6-year-old Timothy making vows to his dead sibling while rescuers dug him out, even though he couldn't hear them. That afternoon, while Mom kept Dad distracted, I looked through his study. I knew I was invading his privacy, but I needed information. I found it in the bottom drawer of his desk, hidden among tax returns. A leather journal. Its pages were filled with Dad's cramped handwriting. But these were not ordinary journal entries. There were conversations. Full conversations between Dad and Michael. Dated all the way up until last week. "Michael, they're going to try to stop you. Me. I will not let them. Michael, you promised. 18 hours. Me. Every year. I have not forgotten. Michael. It's getting difficult to breathe down here. Me. I understand. I apologize. I'm so sorry." Page after page of apologies, pledges, and increasingly urgent assurances that the routine would continue. The most recent entry caused my hands to shake. Michael claims he can see them planning. They say they want to forsake us, but I refuse to let that happen. 18 hours. That is what I owe. That is what we owe. For 18 hours in that pocket of air, he kept me calm and told me stories. I am now protecting him. As Dad's voice came from behind me, I let go of the journal. He protected me for 18 hours. I will never abandon him. He stood at the doorway, quiet. The wild expression had disappeared, replaced by something worse. Absolute assurance. Michael, father does not. He raised a hand. "Don't dare to speak it. You were not there. You have no idea what those 18 hours were like or what he did for me. He was 6 years old, Dad. Exactly like you. He kept me alive." Dad's voice pierced through the darkness. As the air was running out, he kept talking, kept me engaged, and made me swear to remember him and respect those 18 hours. He came to his desk and took up the journal. Every Foundation Day he returns. I can sense him in the basement, waiting. The identical area where we crouched during the collapse. The same gloom and fear. "Dad, you need assistance. Number." He held the diary to his chest. "What I need is my family to be together like they always are." The following several days blurred together. Dad began turning up at my employment, informing my coworkers that I was experiencing mental health issues and required family help. My manager approached me, concerned, and suggested that I take some time off to address family concerns. I reviewed old texts from Dad with fresh eyes. Messages that I assumed were just standard parent stuff took on darker implications. Family means everything. Some bonds cannot be broken. You will understand when you have your own children. Threats posed as affection. He was also working on Emma. I kept calling her, reminding her of how many times I had failed her as a sibling. How I missed her college graduation due to work. How I had forgotten her birthday 2 years ago. Making a case that I was selfish, unstable, and would destroy the family. During one of our secret coffee meetings, Emma suggested that perhaps he is correct. Maybe you should just let it go. There's only 1 day per year. Emma, he is sick. He needs professional assistance. He's processing trauma in his own way, she repeated. I recognized the words. When I tried to express my concerns at my last exam, the family doctor, my father's boyhood friend, repeated the same thing. I started to notice Dad everywhere. His car was in the parking lot as I left work, and I caught a glimpse of him in the grocery store aisle. One night, after returning late from a friend's place, I discovered him in the basement of my apartment building, standing there in the dark. When I discovered him, he replied, "This basement reminds me of home. Same smell, same sensation." That's when Jake contacted me. We hadn't spoken in years, but he had heard through the little town gossip that I was having family issues. "My therapist says, what you described back in high school seems like significant abuse," he told me over coffee. "That's not a typical family tradition." I wanted to cry from relief. Someone else saw it. Someone else understood. Mom agreed to meet me in a diner on the outskirts of town where Dad would not think to look for us. She looked even worse than before, with her cardigan flowing loosely about her frame. "I can't abandon him," she added before I could respond. "He is unwell. I understand that, yet he is my husband. Mom, he needs professional assistance. Real assistance." She rolled up her sleeve to expose bruises in the pattern of fingerprints. "He attracted my attention when I recommended we forego Foundation Day this year. Not to injure me. He was afraid. First. Kept saying Michael would be angry. Then we need no cops." She pulled her sleeve down. "There are no authorities. You do not grasp what this town is like. Everyone knows everybody. They all think he's merely eccentric and committed to family traditions." I showed Emma the newspaper item that night. Her face turned pale as she read about the crash, Michael and the 18 hours. "Oh my God," she whispered. "All those stories about ancestors, all lies or delusions. I don't know which is worse." She glanced up at me, tears flowing down her cheeks. "We can't do this anymore. We can't go down to that basement and pretend we're honoring some family legacy when really we're what? Reenacting his trauma." "No," I said with conviction. "We cannot." The text message arrived on both of our phones at the same time. "Foundation Day is in 1 week, and attendance is mandatory." Dad's message hovered between Emma and me, like a tangible threat. We sat in my flat, both staring at our phones, not speaking for several minutes. Emma's hands trembled as she placed her phone face down on the coffee table. The next morning, Dad arrived at Emma's employment. Her manager later recalled how Dad stood in the lobby for 20 minutes, telling everyone who would listen that his daughter was going through a terrible period and needed family support. He emphasized my disturbing behavior, and how I was attempting to convert Emma against her own family. By lunchtime, 3 of Emma's colleagues had I pulled her aside to see if she was okay, and if she needed help dealing with her troublesome sibling. Emma contacted me from her car, her voice quivering with fury and embarrassment. Dad had cleverly portrayed her as a victim, and I as the attacker. The manipulation was surgically precise. That evening, I discovered Dad had been busier than I had thought. My landlord came on my door and explained that my father had been by to express his concerns about my mental health. Dad had helpfully suggested that the landlord keep an eye on me and check in more frequently. The landlord, a nice elderly man who had known Dad for years, assured he would. I recognized the pattern in the psychology textbooks I'd been hurriedly reading. Isolation, denigrating, and crafting a narrative in which I was the problem, not him. Classic manipulative tactics used by someone desperate to keep control. Mom's sister called me the next day. She'd heard Dad counting under his breath throughout Sunday supper, his lips moving discreetly as he cut the roast. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Over and over. When she inquired whether he was okay, he shouted at her with venom, causing her husband to stand up from the table. The building location where the parking structure fell was roughly 40 minutes from our home. I drove there on Tuesday morning, determined to see where it all began. A strip mall stood there now, ordinary and boring. But in the back corner of the parking lot, I saw a modest memorial plaque that I had never knew existed. In memory of those who perished in the Riverside parking garage collapse on March 22, 1994. Michael Marsh's name appeared third on the list. As I stood there, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photograph of me standing at the memorial, shot from around 50 feet away. The message below said, "Dad thought you might come here." I looked around the parking lot but saw no one. Another text arrived. This time it was a snapshot from my recent Google searches on trauma, PTSD, and involuntary commitment protocols. My laptop. Dad still had access to my apartment. Even if I replaced my locks that afternoon, the harm had already been done. Dad had been watching me, preparing his case. He knew everything I'd looked up and read about how to aid someone with trauma-induced delusions. Emma and I met at a park the next day, choosing a bench in the center of an open field where we could see anyone approaching. She appeared weary, with black circles under her eyes that matched her mom's. She took out her phone and showed me a succession of texts from Dad, each more deceptive than the last. He reminded her of when I had missed her high school graduation. Of the Christmas I spent with a girlfriend's family rather than returning home. Of all perceived slights and abandonments, real or imagined, dating back decades. However, the final text was the worst. "Michael expresses his disappointment with you for listening to your sibling. He believed you were unusual. He assumed you knew about family loyalty." Emma's voice trembled as she told how Dad had never mentioned Michael to her before. Not once during their Foundation Day conversations. But now Michael had ideas about her decisions. That's when I made my decision. I grabbed out my phone and looked up trauma doctors in nearby cities. If our small town didn't assist, I'd find someone who could. After 6 calls, I located Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in trauma-induced psychosis and had dealt with instances involving deceased siblings. Dad's surveillance game is stronger than my phone's parental controls. Screenshots of search history, memorial stalking, and now Michael has thoughts about Emma's allegiance. This ghost brother has just become the world's most demanding supernatural life coach. Dr. Chen heard my brief explanation and consented to an emergency consultation. She couldn't treat Dad without his consent, but she could give us advice on how to approach the situation. Her first bit of advice was stark. Document everything. So I began documenting every encounter, text and voicemail. Emma did the same. When we gently contacted Mom about it, she disclosed that she had been chronicling Dad's actions for years. She gave us a hidden folder on her laptop full with movies made secretly with her phone. Dad talking to empty corners, cutting tally marks into the basement floor, and sitting in the dark at 3 a.m. counting. The videos covered 5 years. Dad's talks with Michael were sparse at first, centered on Foundation Day. However, they grew in frequency and urgency year after year. Dad bargained with the vacant area in the most recent video from last month, telling Michael that the family would never quit their custom. Mom also told me something that made my stomach drop. She had discovered Sewer's false notes, one for each year, all dated March 23rd, the day following the founding day. Dad wrote them before each rite and discarded them afterward. But Mom had been keeping them hidden in a safety deposit box that Dad was unaware of. The notes all said variations on the same thing. If the tradition was ever interrupted, if the family failed to observe those 18 hours, Dad would accompany Michael. He couldn't face the idea of Michael waiting alone in the dark. Dad's behavior shifted 3 days before the Foundation Day. He stopped going to work, calling in sick in a voice that sounded completely normal. He spent his days preparing the basement and ensuring its authenticity. Mom witnessed him bringing down blankets, bottles of water, and cans of beans among other things. A propane heater, multiple gasoline drums, and a basement door lock that could only be unlocked from inside. When Mom confronted him about the lock, Dad's facade slipped completely. He grasped her shoulders, his fingers pressing in firmly enough to create new bruises, and explained with scary calm that the family needed to comprehend Michael's dedication to being trapped in the collapsing garage and unable to escape. The least they could do was feel the same powerlessness. Mom called me sobbing from her car. She had fled the house and was waiting in a grocery store parking lot, frightened to return home. That's when I realized we couldn't wait for Foundation Day. We needed to act now. I phoned Jake's family. His parents, both retired teachers, had previous experience working with difficult families. They pledged to help in whatever way they could. Jake's mother offered Mom a guest room, while his father contacted a retired crisis counselor. But when Mom returned to pack a suitcase, Dad was waiting. She then told us that he had been calm and even apologized. He stated that the tension of Foundation Day had always affected him, but that everything would be okay once it was finished. He promised no locks on the door and that it would be just like any other year. Mom wanted to believe him. After 30 years of marriage, she wanted to believe that the guy she loved was still alive behind the trauma and delusion, so she stayed. Emma and I made an agreement that night, Vim. Whatever occurred, we would not go into that basement. We would support each other and show a united face. If Dad wanted to keep up his ritual, he'd have to do it alone. The next morning, 48 hours before the foundation day, I awoke to discover Dad in my apartment. He sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee he'd made himself, and looked around like any other father visiting his child. Except, it was 5 a.m. I had changed the locks and there were new scratches around the deadbolt, indicating that he had picked it. He grinned when he saw me, with the same satisfied face from the basement, as if everything was going as planned. He motioned to the chair across from him, and I sat with my heart pounding. Dad explained, without emotion, that he understood my fears. He knew I had been investigating trauma and PTSD. He was aware of my calls to therapists. He was even aware of Mom's recordings, having discovered her hidden folder several weeks prior. But none of that mattered, he claimed, because Michael had explained everything. According to Dad, Michael had also paid me a visit. I simply didn't recall. Michael had tried to help me comprehend, but outside forces like Jake, the therapists, and the internet were clouding my judgment. That's why this foundation day was so significant. It would help me remember and comprehend why the ritual needed to continue. I kept my voice steady and told Dad that I loved him, but would not be attending foundation day. His face moved through a variety of looks, including astonishment, hurt, and fury, before settling on one that chilled me to the core. Acceptance. He stood, rubbed my shoulder, and told me Michael had warned him this may happen, that I might be too far gone to save, but that was well. Emma would understand. Emma would continue the custom. After he went, I immediately contacted Emma. She didn't respond. I called 6 more times before dashing to her flat. Her roommate responded to the door with confusion. Emma had departed an hour earlier, claiming her father needed assistance with a family situation. I drove to my parents' house disregarding all speed limits. Dad's car was in the driveway, properly parked this time. The house appeared serene in the morning light, but the basement door was open. I could hear voices down below. Dad's calm tone blended with Emma's distraught tone. I crept down the stairs while my phone recorded everything. They sat within the ritual circle. Dad is holding Emma's hands. He was talking about how Michael had picked her and how delighted he was that she understood family devotion in a way that I never could. Emma's eyes were welling with tears, but she nodded along, torn between her love for our father and her developing comprehension of his condition. That's when I noticed Dad's supplies, which included more than simply beans and water. The propane heater sat in the corner, unlit but ready. The gas containers lined the wall, and next to Dad, practically concealed under a blanket, was a length of chain and a padlock. When I walked into the basement, Dad's face lit up with that dreadful relief again. He proclaimed to the coroner that both of his children had returned home, and Michael's patience had been rewarded. Emma gazed at me with desperate eyes. Dad's grasp on her hands was hard and protective. She mouthed, "Help." Silently. I told Dad that we also needed Mom here. That if this was truly about family, we should all be present. His face was filled with perplexity, as if he had forgotten Mom existed. But then he nodded and said, "Michael agreed. The whole family should be here." I grabbed Emma and we fled while Dad walked upstairs to get Mom. We got to my car before Dad noticed what had happened. As I drove away, I noticed him in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway, not chasing us, but just observing and counting on his fingers. Emma broke down fully after we were secure. She revealed that her father had been visiting her every night for the previous week, sitting outside her apartment and placing messages under her door. The notes contained exchanges between Michael and his father regarding Emma's crucial role in carrying on the tradition and how she was the only one who truly understood. We drove to Jake's parents' home, where Mom was already waiting. When Dad went to the basement, she ran, snatching the box of sewage notes and movies as she went. We were in their living room, 3 generations of Marsh family members finally agreeing to accept the reality. Dad was critically unwell and needed professional assistance. Jake's father, a retired crisis counselor, guided us through our alternatives. We may request an emergency psychiatric hold if Dad became a threat to himself or others. Although the gasoline and propane heaters hinted to this possibility, these interventions were only temporary. Long-term healing would necessitate Dad's involvement. My phone rang as we were discussing our possibilities. "Dad," I almost didn't respond, but Jake's father recommended I put it on speaker so everyone could hear. Dad's voice sounded different, younger somehow. He spoke rapidly and urgently, indicating that Michael was becoming impatient. The foundation day was approaching, and preparations had still to be completed. He needed to go home to his folks. Michael needed them at home. Then, in mid-sentence, his voice altered, becoming smaller and higher-pitched. "Please come back," he pleaded in an unfamiliar voice. "It's dark down here, I'm scared. Please don't leave me alone." The phone connection went dead. Mom's face had turned white. She said, "Dad, you just sounded like Michael." She'd heard recordings of Michael's voice on old home tapes, and Dad had wonderfully recorded it. That's when we discovered just how far Dad had strayed from reality. He wasn't only speaking with Michael anymore. Part of him had transformed into Michael. The 6-year-old boy who died in the dark was living within Dad's damaged psyche, wanting recognition and those 18 hours of recollection. We called emergency services and explained the situation as fully as we could. The operator took our information but explained that they could not intervene unless there was an immediate threat. Dad talked to himself, and imitating voices wasn't enough. So we waited, watched the hours pass, and received more agitated texts from Dad in which his voice alternated with Michael's. Photos of the basement preparations for Foundation Day. Videos show him performing the ceremony alone, speaking to empty spaces where his family should be. Mom had named a construction worker who called that evening. He had heard about our family's circumstances and wanted to help. He had been a member of the rescue crew in 1994. He remembers the day vividly. That voice change makes me question what's going on in Dad's thinking. Did he rehearse Michael's voice from the old videos his mother referenced? Or is this something deeper? The timing of him becoming Michael just as the family declines to participate seems too convenient. He said something that reframed everything. Michael had not killed instantly in the collapse. He had been alive for hours, locked in a different pocket of air than Timothy. The lads could hear one another through the rubble. Michael had kept Timothy quiet by reading him stories and making him vow to remember them and to tell everyone about Michael's bravery. But as the hours passed, Michael's voice grew weaker. Timothy had implored him to continue talking, had promised everything if Michael would only stay awake. The rescue worker reported that they could hear Timothy making increasingly desperate promises through the rubble. "I will never forget you. I'll recount your stories every year. I will ensure that you are never alone in the dark again." By hour 15, Michael had ceased reacting, but Timothy continued to talk, promise, and count down the hours until rescue arrived. When they eventually got him out at hour 18, he was still talking to his brother and making promises to someone who couldn't hear him. The rescue worker's voice broke as he told how Timothy had battled them as they attempted to remove him from the collapse scene. He screamed that Michael was still down there and he couldn't leave him alone. It took 3 adults to transport the terrified boy to the ambulance. Now I understand. Foundation Day was about more than just remembering the trauma. It was about honoring a commitment made by a terrified 6-year-old to his dying sibling. A promise had grown into a hazardous fantasy over the course of 30 years. As we sat with this new awareness, Mom's phone rang. A text message from Dad. A photograph of the basement. But something was different. He had used the gasoline to scrawl words on the concrete floor. 18 hours, or forever. A single line of text appeared below the photo. Michael believes the moment has come to make a decision. Foundation Day would start in 12 hours. Emergency responders came at daybreak. 12 hours before Foundation Day was scheduled to begin. Mom had finally convinced them that Dad's gasoline message posed a genuine threat. 2 cop cars and an ambulance drove up quietly. No sirens were used to prevent exacerbating the situation. I observed from Jake's parents' living room window as the officers approached our house. Dad must have been watching too, since he emerged on the front porch before they got to the door. He appeared composed, almost tranquil, wearing his nicest shirt as if he were going to church. The lead officer spoke with him for a few minutes. Even from across the street, I could see Dad's gestures, calm, reasonable, and reassuring. He nodded and pointed to the home as if expressing something totally logical. After about 10 minutes, the officer appeared to relax. One even laughed at what Dad said. Mom squeezed my arm firmly enough to leave marks. We both knew what was going on. Dad was doing what he'd always done. Charming authority figures and making his addiction seem like a harmless family tradition. The officer's body language had changed from cautious to empathetic. Emma began recording on her phone as Dad welcomed the officers inside. They accompanied him voluntarily, most likely expecting to see a normal family home with a caring father coping with troublesome adult children. We lost sight of them for 20 agonizing minutes. When they came out, Dad was shaking hands with both officers. They returned to their cars, looking satisfied. Case closed. The ambulance drove away without a passenger. As the cop cars drove away, Dad stood on the porch, looking directly at Jake's parents' house. He raised his hand in a little wave. Mom broke down entirely. 30 years of marriage, enabling, and looking the other way. Everything came tumbling down as she watched the police cars drive away. She'd finally summoned the nerve to ask for assistance, and Dad had deflected it with a smile and logical explanation. Jake's mother prepared tea for his mother as his father sought advice from a crisis counselor acquaintance. The counselor confirmed what we had already guessed. Authorities were hesitant to intervene in family disputes unless there was compelling proof of imminent harm. Dad, by presenting as calm and rational, made involuntary commitment practically difficult. Emma continued checking her phone obsessively. Dad had been texting her every few minutes, alternately using his voice and Michael's. Michael's texts were becoming increasingly urgent, urging her to come home and claiming he was afraid and alone. The psychological torture was precise and persistent. I took a judgment that contradicted all professional recommendations. If the system did not help us, I would go back and document everything myself. Obtain video evidence of Dad's preparations, talks with Michael, and the fuel and propane, which authorities could not deny. Mom attempted to stop me, but I emphasized that we needed proof. Real, obvious evidence that Dad was landing something dangerous. Emma insisted on accompanying me, claiming she couldn't allow me face him alone. We made a compromise. She'd wait in the car, the engine running, while I went inside. When we arrived, something felt different about the house. Despite Dad's car being in the driveway, all of the curtains were drawn, giving the impression that it was abandoned. The front door was slightly open, like an invitation or a trap. I entered the kitchen with my phone capturing everything. The home was quiet, except for a faint sound from below. Dad's voice remained calm and rhythmic while counting. I crept towards the basement entrance, attempting to regulate my breathing. The stench was the first thing that hit me. The gasoline smells were powerful enough to make my eyes water. I looked down the stairs and noticed a flickering candlelight dancing on the walls. Dad had already begun, despite the fact that Foundation Day was not supposed to start for another 8 hours. He sat in the center of the ritual circle, surrounded by the supplies he had collected. The propane heater burned softly in the corner. The gas cans formed a semicircle around him. The chain, one end clamped around his ankle and the other connected to a support beam, however, caused my blood to freeze. Dad wasn't only planning to keep us in the basement. He had made sure he couldn't go. He must have heard me since his counting paused. Without glancing around, he spoke in that younger tone. Michael's voice. He praised me for returning home. He said he was terrified to wait alone. Then his speech returned to normal, stating that Michael finally understood why the family couldn't come. They were overly impacted by the outside world, but that was acceptable. He and Michael would do the ceremony jointly. I tried to reason with him, saying that Mom and Emma were concerned because we all loved him and wanted to help. Dad laughed warmly, not cruelly. He claimed he knew we loved him, and he loved us back. That was why he was doing this. To uphold his pledge and ensure Michael was never abandoned again. The math was simple, he explained. 30 years of 18 hours per year. It was 540 hours he had given Michael. But that wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Michael had spent his final hours soothing Timothy, telling him stories and dying slowly in the dark so that his brother may live. The loan could never be paid unless Dad put up the key to his ankle chain. He explained that he would wait the entire 18 hours as usual. But this time, after it was over, he had a choice. Unlock the chain to repeat the cycle the following year, or drop the key down the old heating grate where no one can get it. Stay with Michael forever. Finally, rebalance the scales. I asked him to come upstairs and speak with Dr. Chen, to try medication, therapy, or anything else. Dad's response chilled me. He stated he had tried treatment years ago when I was younger. The therapist had advised him to let Michael go and absorb his grief. But letting go entailed breaching his promise. It meant leaving a 6-year-old youngster alone in the dark indefinitely. So he had stopped going. I told Mom that the therapist said he was fine. And for a while, the ritual had sufficed. 18 hours per year to honor his brother and uphold his pledge. But lately, Michael's voice had become louder, the guilt deeper, and the counting constant. Dad glanced at me, then actually looked at me, and for a little time, I saw the father I knew from boyhood, the one who taught me to ride a bike and cheered me on at soccer matches. He begged me to apologize to Emma for scaring her, to tell Mom he loved her, and to focus on the good moments rather than the bad. Then he returned to his circle and resumed counting. I dashed up the stairs, out of the house and into the car where Emma waited. She took one look at my face and drove away, without asking any questions until we were several miles away. When I eventually told her what I had witnessed, she pulled over, and we both sobbed. We contacted emergency services again, reporting the chain, fuel, and propane. This time, they took the situation seriously. The fire department, police, and ambulances are all speeding toward our childhood house. Emma and I followed from a distance, frightened to hope. When we arrived, the situation had devolved into chaos. Emergency trucks had blocked the street. Neighbors stood on their lawns, watching. Mom had come and was standing with Jake's dad near the police tape. Her face was blank from astonishment. A firefighter came out of the house and spoke with the incident commander. Even from where we stood, we could detect the displeasure in their body language. Emma and I pressed closer, hoping to hear. Dad had barricaded the basement entrance from the interior. Not forcefully, he simply wedged it shut and explained politely that he was following a family tradition and appreciated privacy. He assured them that he intended no damage to anyone, including himself. He only needed 18 hours. When they mentioned the fuel, he smiled and said that it was for the generator in case the lights went out, the propane heater in case the basement became chilly, and the chain around his ankle as a personal choice to guarantee he kept his promise. He had the key. When the timer ran out, he would unlock it. Everything was fine. The incident commander was in an impossible situation. Dad sounded rational. He was not threatening anyone. He said that the fuel was stored safely. The propane heater was up to code. Without strong proof of imminent danger, forced entry could exacerbate a stable situation. They decided to wait, assess the situation, and attempt to initiate communication. A negotiator arrived and spent 3 hours trying to engage Dad through the door. Dad reacted pleasantly, yet strongly. He was fine. His family overreacted. He'd come out once the 18 hours were up. As the afternoon turned to evening, our family remained vigilant in Jake's parents' yard. Emma clutched to Mom. Both were tired from terror and despair. I watched the home, calculating the hours like Dad had instructed us. 6 o'clock came and went. The official commencement of Foundation Day is approximately 8. Smoke began to leak from the basement windows. The firefighters raced in, axes bursting down the door that had been securely jammed shut. Smoke streamed out, thick and black. We could hear shouts. The crash of machinery. The hiss of water meeting fire. They took Dad out on a stretcher, unconscious but breathing from smoke inhalation. The propane heater had malfunctioned, but no one knew whether this was by accident or purpose. The fire had spread to the stored gasoline, forming a noxious cloud that would have summoned him if firefighters hadn't broken through. Dad was in and out of consciousness at the hospital for several days. When he finally awoke, he appeared perplexed. He begged for Michael, but stopped himself and asked for Mom instead. The experts stated that oxygen deprivation can impair memory, personality, and behavior. Only time would tell how much harm had been caused. But something had changed. Dad's eyes lacked assurance. He stared at us as if he could see well for the first time in years. When Emma gingerly grabbed his hand, he gripped back and mumbled an apology that crushed our hearts. The psychiatric assessment was required following the occurrence. Dr. Chen talked with a hospital psychiatrist and shared our documentation, films, and 30-year pattern. Dad did not oppose it. He sat through the classes, answered questions, and completed assessments. The diagnosis was difficult. PTSD, difficult bereavement, and dissociation episodes caused by survivor guilt. Long-term intensive therapy, drug trials, and possibly inpatient care would be the treatment options. Dad agreed to everything with tiredness, as if the struggle had finally left him, or Michael's voice had finally quieted. The house was uninhabitable. Smoke and water damage have completely wrecked the basement and first story. Mom stayed with Jake's parents while insurance was straightened out. Emma returned to her apartment and called her mother every night. I returned to work, evading worried queries from co-workers who had heard different versions of the story. 6 months later, Dad was stable enough for supervised visits. We met at a neutral spot. A therapist's office constructed specifically for family sessions. Dad appeared older but clearer, as if fog had dissipated from his features. He spoke cautiously, acknowledging the suffering he had inflicted while avoiding the cycle of guilt that had held him captive for so long. He told us about Michael, not the voice in his brain, but his real brother, a boy who liked dinosaurs and despised vegetables, who always let Timothy win at sports and sang ridiculous songs when Timothy was terrified. For the first time in 30 years, Dad remembered Michael as he truly was, not as a burden of obligation and guilt. Dad claimed to have visited the warehouse at the collapse site, but not to maintain a shrine. He'd been trying to figure out why that area had such power over him. The therapist helped him recognize that he had been seeking to control trauma. by returning to its source, as well as to master fear by confronting it again. Mom sought for a separation, not divorce. She adored her father but could not bear the thought of allowing his condition to continue. She too needed to recover in order to recognize her own role in perpetuating the toxic relationship. They went to couples counseling individually and jointly, working through 3 decades of accumulated harm. Emma struggled the most. She had internalized her father's manipulation and believed she was responsible for continuing the practice. Her own therapy was on breaking free from that narrative and learning that love did not imply encouraging someone's self-destruction. I bore my own guilt. Guilt for not recognizing Dad's illness sooner, for participating in the ritual all these years, and for the final confrontation that almost killed him. My therapist reminded me that children are not responsible for their parents' pain, and that acknowledging abuse does not imply not loving the abuser. The next year, on March 22, Foundation Day was celebrated again. Dad was in a residential treatment facility, undergoing exposure therapy with qualified professionals. Mom was taking pottery classes to reconnect with herself after decades of dealing with her father's illness. Emma had begun seeing a man who was aware of our family background but still loved her. I spent the day normally, going to work, having lunch with a co-worker, and watching a movie that evening. But, at 6 o'clock, I lit a candle. Not for 18 hours. Not in a cellar. But a moment of recognition for 2 boys who had been subjected to unspeakable horror, and for the family now working to heal from the aftermath. The flame flickered in my apartment window as I thought about cycles, breaking them, pledges that bind, and love that sometimes means letting go, the distinction between appreciating the past and becoming trapped by it. After a few minutes I blew out the candle and began preparing dinner. Life continued, imperfect but moving forward. The Marsh family custom had finally come to an end, replaced by something harder but healthier. The continual process of recuperation. Dad called that evening from the treatment center. Brief check-ins were part of his treatment. He seemed exhausted but engaged, asking about my day and sharing a modest breakthrough from the group session. Neither of us mentioned the day. We did not need to. The date had lost its hold on us, becoming merely another square on the calendar. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my flat. Not counting the hours or making promises to spirits. Simply breathing, living, and allowing me to be free from the foundation of hereditary trauma. It was not a dramatic conclusion. There is no smooth resolution or flawless healing. Just a family learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to live with their past without being defined by it. The actual job was only beginning. Hello everyone, this is Mini Fable Fever. My dad told me, "You've always been independent, handle it," after I called from the ICU. 3 years later, he wanted power. I said, "Help yourself." I am a 30-year-old guy, and my narrative starts with a drunk driver, a rainy highway, and the sound of my spine shattering against a seatbelt. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was traveling home from work. The rain had been pouring down heavily all evening, making every road shimmer with confusion. I was just 10 minutes from home when a pickup truck ran a red light and collided with the driver's side of my automobile. I didn't see it coming. All I remember is the metal folding, the airbags deploying, and everything going black. 3 days later, I awoke in the ICU with a tube in my throat, a neck brace, and pain all over. Doctors diagnosed me with a fractured back, a shattered femur, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding that nearly killed me. The impact badly twisted my body, and they weren't sure I'd be able to walk normally again. The nurse indicated that I'd require at least 8 months of physical therapy, possibly more. That was horrible enough. The stillness, however, was what truly broke me. There was no one there when I opened my eyes. There were no flowers, texts, or family members swarming around my door, only beeping monitors and the sounds of nurses outside. I inquired as to if anyone had come to visit. The nurse said, "No, not yet." My dad and older sister didn't show up until the 3rd day. They stood awkwardly beside the window, avoiding eye contact. My mother brought a bag of grapes, as if it were a casual afternoon visit. My father joked about how I had finally taken a break from working extra. My sister kept scrolling through her phone the entire time. They stayed for 15 minutes and left. I did not hear from them again. My girlfriend, or rather my ex, arrived once. She stood near the bed, her eyes wide with fear, barely able to look at me. The next time I heard from her was 2 days later, via SMS. "I can't do it. I apologize. I did not sign up for this type of future." That was it. 4 years together, and gone in 8 words. The invoices began to arrive while I was still in the hospital resting. My job placed me on temporary disability, so my income decreased to a fraction of what it had been. The automobile was totaled. I was still paying rent for an apartment that I couldn't get to. My savings were depleted in less than 2 weeks due to an ambulance ride, emergency surgery, and hospitalization. I contacted my father and asked for aid. Just a few $100s will cover groceries and a portion of January's rent. He groaned and said, "You've always been independent. Handle it." He hung up, and my sister didn't even pick up. By mid-January, I was served an eviction notice because I couldn't work, move properly, or pay. My landlord gave me until the end of the month to vacate, so I called my family again, desperate, asking if I could stay in the guest room. She didn't ask where I was staying or if I could walk yet. My mom said it wasn't a good time since my sister had the flu, and they didn't want me to bring hospital germs. I slept in my rental car for 5 nights, parked in the lot behind my old gym, turned off the engine to save fuel, pulled the seat back and wrapped myself in hospital blankets. The brace around my leg made it nearly impossible to get comfortable. I barely slept, I barely ate, I counted coins to buy drive-through fries, and I had to crawl to public restrooms using my arms because I couldn't put pressure on my leg without crutches, which I couldn't easily carry without a bag, which I didn't have. After seeing me parked outside the office lot one night, a co-worker, who I wasn't even close to, found out and invited me to stay with him and his wife. They gave me a pull-out couch, cooked for me, and assisted me in getting to doctor appointments. Strangers treated me as if I were more important than my own blood. A few days later I saw photos online from Christmas, and my entire family was smiling around the dinner table, with candles, wine and matching pajamas. I wasn't just forgotten, I was purposefully left out. On New Year's Day my sister called, saying they hadn't helped me because they didn't want to enable me, and that I needed to learn how to ask for help the right way. I asked her if they even cared that I couldn't walk without assistance, couldn't bathe properly, and couldn't cover my medical co-pays. She told me I was being dramatic. I left voicemails. I cried with them. I told them I didn't know what to do. I told them I was scared. I got one response. A text from my father. "Get it together, man." When I tried one last time, I called my mother from the couch I was borrowing and told her I needed help until I could stand on my own. She told me to stop guilt-tripping everyone, and then blocked my phone number. That was the moment something in me just shut off. I don't remember much from the 2 weeks that followed, panic attacks and numb days. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, not even able to cry anymore. If I had access to anything more dangerous than crutches, I probably wouldn't be here. Then one afternoon, I received an email from my old college professor, who had heard about the accident through a mutual friend and offered me a room above his garage. He said it wasn't much, but I could stay until I figured things out, and I accepted without hesitation. The next morning he picked me up and helped me carry my belongings, which were only a duffel bag and my brace. As I looked in the mirror that night, bruises still yellow on my skin, I made a silent vow. I would never ask for help again, and I would never give them another chance to abandon me. They had their chance. The physical therapy center was buried between a laundromat and a dentist's office, the type of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. I went there twice a week, and the session began with stretching, then balance exercises, and then walking with parallel bars. My left leg shook like it was made of paper the first time I stood without help, and by the end of the second week I was making it across the room on crutches. The pain made my vision blur, but I showed up every time, no excuses, no missed sessions. Back in the small room above the garage, I opened my laptop every morning like it was a lifeline. I taught myself new tools, updated my old portfolios, and started picking up freelance gigs, graphic design, copywriting and branding for small businesses. The room didn't have a kitchen, so I got used to heating canned soup and working through dinner. Some nights, I stayed up until 3 a.m., chasing invoices or polishing drafts. The money came in slowly at first. Within 3 months, I was able to pay for my own therapy sessions, fill my prescriptions on time, and keep my phone plan active. It felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. 2 friends from college contacted me unexpectedly, one of whom sent me an Uber Estates gift card and asked for my Venmo. The other mailed a package with snacks, socks, and a handwritten letter. We hadn't talked in years, but they heard what happened and wanted to help. There was no guilt, no lectures, just genuine support. The professor I was living with began checking in every evening, knocking once and walking in with tea or takeout, asking how the leg was doing, and offering small bits of advice. A therapist in town agreed to work with me on a sliding scale. He taught me how to build a proper invoice system, how to negotiate rates, and how to say no without apology. He advised me to treat my comeback like a business plan, track every win, analyze every loss, and never let those who gave up on me have a seat at the table ever again. Every week I walked out of her office a little straighter, a little less angry. The therapist's office smelled like citrus and old books, and for the first time in my life, I told her about how my family had always treated independence as a threat and emotional needs as a weakness. She didn't interrupt or try to fix me, she simply listened. From January to May, my phone was silent. No texts, no emails, no calls from my parents, no calls from my sister. No one inquired about my recovery. No one asked if I could walk yet. I blocked their numbers and never looked back. By month 5, I had graduated from using a cane to walking unassisted. My stride was slow and uneven, but I made it from the garage to the mailbox without pausing. That same week I signed a lease on a tiny studio apartment 15 minutes away, which had peeling paint and one working window air conditioner, but it was mine, and every penny of rent came from my own efforts. A week after I moved in, I secured my first significant client, a 6-month contract with a firm looking to rebrand. It was solid money with room for growth, so I bought a nice workstation, stocked my fridge with real food, and even set up auto-pay for my phone bill. No more scraping and asking. After paying off one of my hospital debts, the professor drove me to the courthouse and took a photo of me standing at the top of the stairs with my crutches. He printed it, framed it, and gave it to me before I moved out, saying it was proof that I could climb back from anything. Then one day, out of nowhere, my mother's sister sent me a message with only one line. "Your dad says, you're doing better. Good for you." No invitation to reconnect. I left the message on read. By summer, I looked nothing like the man who'd been sleeping in his car 5 months ago. I shaved my beard, trimmed my hair, and began strength training with a personal trainer my therapist recommended. I wore fitted clothes now. I spoke more confidently, stood taller, and people at coffee shops mistook me for someone with options, which I didn't dispute. Then my sister texted me, "Heard you're doing okay. We knew you'd bounce back eventually." No apology, no ownership, no mention of the months they ignored my voicemails, left me sleeping in a rental car, or blocked me when I asked for help. Just a smug pat on the back from the same individuals who watched me drown. I once said, "Don't ever pretend you believed in me. You all left me for dead." I banned her number again, this time permanently, but a few days later, a voicemail arrived from an unknown number. The wedding invitation arrived in a white envelope with gold foil lettering and a wax seal on the back. There was no return address, just my name and apartment number spelled out neatly. Later I realized they must have used a different phone to overcome the block, as it was my father's voice. I brought the whole thing to my next therapy session and laid it on the table. My therapist looked at it for a long time before asking me one question. Inside there was a formal invitation to my sister's wedding in 2 months at a vineyard outside the city, black tie optional. There was no personal message or note, just a printed RSVP card and one line at the bottom. "What do they want from you now?" I didn't have an answer. 3 days later, my mother messaged me saying, "It would mean a lot to your sister if you were there." I didn't respond. Then my father called, and I let it go to voicemail. It was the first time I'd heard his voice after the accident. He didn't ask how I was doing or mention anything about my rehabilitation. Instead, he told me that I should be thankful that they didn't coddle me when things became tough, saying, "Look where that led you. You bounced back." We were correct not to meddle. I did not delete the mail, nor did I respond. A day later, my sister sent me another SMS. "You're holding a grudge at the best period of my life." There's no mention of what transpired. No mention of the hospital, the rental car, or the nights I went without food. Only her personal celebration. Her big day. I produced a formal response. I typed it out, printed it, and signed it. "You lost the right to call me family when you left me in a hospital bed alone," I wrote and mailed it back. The next phone call came from my aunt, who called to check in but quickly brought up the wedding. She said the family group chat was full of people calling me selfish, bitter, and dramatic, and that I was ruining what should have been a happy time. I asked her if she remembered what happened to me. She paused for a second, then said, "Well, that was a while ago." I told her I wasn't interested in updates any longer and ended the call. 2 nights later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since college messaged me privately, saying he saw everything in the group chat and couldn't believe how they were talking about me. I thanked him, but I didn't say anything else because I wasn't trying to recruit defenders, I just wanted them out of my life. My father left a lengthy voicemail after that, saying I was embarrassing myself. I said I was trying to make people feel sorry for me instead of taking responsibility for my actions. I said I needed to grow up and stop playing the victim. I blocked his number and my sister's number right after I listened to it. There would be no more texts, voicemails, or reaching out. Whatever they had to say could stay in their private chat, far away from me. The wedding went on without me, and I only found out about it when a former coworker who is distantly related to my sister's husband mentioned it in passing. No one else contacted me, no one sent pictures, no one asked why I didn't show up, and they continued with the story they created, in which I was the ungrateful one who cut them off for no reason. And honestly, I let them. For the first time in my life, the stillness didn't feel like a punishment, but like calm. I still went to physical therapy every week, worked on a contract with a tech startup, saved money, and made progress with a personal trainer. I found a small community of other freelancers in the city who met twice a month to talk. Business and burnout. I got invited to a friend's housewarming. I made plans for a short vacation for the first time in 2 years. Then, one morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, clean cut, standing tall without any support, and realized something had shifted. I had spent the previous year rebuilding. They had a front row seat to my most difficult moments and chose to walk away, but now it was time to start growing. I wasn't going to just recover, I was going to thrive, and they'd have no choice but to watch from the sidelines. On a Wednesday morning, I received an email with the subject line "Official Offer" from the startup where I had been freelancing for the previous 6 months. They wanted to hire me for a full-time remote position with full benefits, health and dental insurance, stock options, paid vacation, and a salary 3 times what I was making before the accident. I accepted within an hour. To celebrate the start of the onboarding process, I booked a solo trip to a national park 2 states away for the following week. I packed light, trail shoes, simple gear, nothing fancy, and drove myself out there with music playing the entire time, no crutches or cane, just my own 2 legs in the winding trails. I hiked until sunset, slept under the stars in a rented cabin, and made my own coffee every morning while the air was still cold and quiet. It was my first vacation since before the crash, and it felt earned. When I returned, a friend from the freelancer circle invited me to a small group of men in recovery, some of whom were former athletes healing from injuries. My phone remained silent, and my parents never contacted me after I declined the wedding. Some were military veterans, while others, like me, were rebuilding after family breakdowns or life-changing events. We met twice a month at a community center, with no lectures or forced bonding, just honesty. I joined right away. My sister never tried again. The group chat I'd heard about was most likely still operational, but no one contacted me about it. Their silence was louder than anything they could have said, and I left it that way until a letter arrived at my flat. I'd recently updated my address through official channels, and I suspect someone accessed it indirectly through an old billing record or mutual contact. Inside there was a formal notice stating that my parents were adjusting their estate plans. The message was simple: I anticipate being excluded from any inheritance. I had retained a lawyer through my job's legal network since the inheritance letter arrived, and when the estate message arrived, I simply had them send back a formal statement on my behalf, with no further communication required. I relinquish any and all claims to family assets, effective immediately, with no fuss, no back and forth, just closure. Instead of wasting time thinking about them, I used my new company's education assistance program to enroll in an online MBA. I kept up with coursework in the evenings, balancing it with work and workouts. The days were busy, but every one of them moved me forward. A few months later, I started looking at real estate. I'd been saving consistently, keeping my lifestyle simple, and had a down payment ready. My realtor showed me a quiet 1-bedroom cottage just outside the city, surrounded by trees, with a wraparound porch and enough yard to breathe. I put in an offer the same day, and it was approved 2 days later. I signed the paperwork with only my own name on the deed. On movie day, I stood in the living room with the windows open and the walls bare, knowing I had crossed a line they'd never see again. A few months later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school drove to my property and rang the gate intercom. He did a double take before realizing who I was, and we caught up for a few minutes before he asked if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. I consented, not for nostalgia, but for closure. At lunch he mentioned my father, saying he had seen him at a local fundraiser and that my father had been discussing how I had declined treatment and gone off the rails someplace out west. I didn't react. I just told him what really occurred, how they all disappeared when I needed them the most, and how I'd built what I had without a single dollar from them. He didn't dispute, just nodded slowly and said, "That sounds more like them, to be honest." We paid our bills separately and made no plans to meet again. A few days later I received a message from an unknown number, which I heard once before flagging it. It was my father's voice. He didn't say his name, but there was no mistake. He just said, "I hope you enjoy your solitude. You chose it." I forwarded the number to my carrier and had it permanently screened. That line would never be open again, and I deleted every backup of their contacts. There were no buried email threads, no preserved voicemails, no prospect of re-entry, and my phone belonged to the future, not the past. The last thing I did was compose a letter to myself, not to send, detailing everything from the moment I awoke alone in the hospital to the day the inheritance letter arrived. I signed it at the bottom, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in a fireproof lockbox under my bed. On the front, I labeled it, "The past days here," and I meant it. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, and a man introduced himself as my sister's fiancé. His voice was shaky, as if he didn't want to be doing this. My number was no longer for anyone from that family, no matter how politely they asked or who sent it. He said she wanted to talk, that she hoped I'd listen to her, and asked me to call back. I deleted the message without even playing it twice. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope had no return address, just a familiar handwriting on it, and it contained 4 pages of handwritten, neatly folded explanations from my sister. There was no apology, just pages of explaining, and she said I was making things more difficult than they needed to be, and that I was choosing to carry hate. Despite the fact that our family was complicated, we owed it to each other to reconnect before it was too late. I read every word once, then folded it back up and put it in a folder labeled for documentation only, just in case things got out of hand. What bothered me more than the letter itself was the fact that she even had my address. I called my old landlord that evening, the one who owned the place above the professor's garage, and he sounded surprised to hear from me when I asked if he'd given out my new address to anyone. He hesitated, then admitted my mother had duped him months ago by pretending to be from a hospital billing agency. I didn't anticipate that angle back then, but I immediately updated all of my forwarding settings after that call. The next day, I changed my phone number, not just for peace of mind, but because I wanted to close every door they thought they still had a key to. I also had a home security system installed which included cameras, smart locks, motion sensors, and no loopholes or soft entry points. A few days later, the fiancé contacted out again via email, saying he didn't know the whole situation, but that he was caught in the middle and simply passed along her request. His tone was cautious and emotional, but he still felt like a courier rather than a man with a stake in it. He told me that my sister was pregnant, that they were expecting their first child, and that she wanted to make things right before the baby arrived. He asked me to consider speaking with her at least once for the sake of the child. But I didn't respond. A pregnancy doesn't undo abandonment, and a baby doesn't erase what they did to me when I needed them the most. At my next therapy session, I mentioned the email. My therapist listened carefully and then said something that stuck. "It sounds like they want your forgiveness for their own comfort, not because they're sorry." Later that week, a box arrived at my front door with no return label, containing a baby onesie and a card that said, "Your nephew deserves to know his uncle." That was it. No names, no signatures, just that. I left the package sealed, walked straight to the outdoor trash can, and dumped it in without a second thought. Then I sat down at my desk and wrote one statement in my journal. Children should be raised by people who understand love, and you made sure I never would. A few days went by. Then another message arrived, this time from my mother's second husband, whom I hadn't heard from in over a decade. I ignored it because I hadn't tightened my social media privacy settings, and he followed up with, "They're in pain, you know." I replied once. Good. Then I blocked him as well. I took that energy and redirected it. I joined a mentorship program run by a community nonprofit, and I meet with young men trying to rebuild AF. Not long after, a co-worker from my remote job invited me to a small industry dinner. I share what I've learned, not as a psychotherapist, but as someone who has been through the fire and found a way out. At the table, his father overheard my name and asked if I was related to someone from a nearby city. It turned out that my father had been dropping me off at events, telling people I'd lost my way, and that he was grieving a son who cut off the family for no reason. I didn't react, and just finished my plate. Later that night, the coworker messaged me privately and told me that after I left, he explained the true story to his father. The hospital, the silence, the betrayal, everything. His father didn't say much, but admitted quietly, "I've never been more embarrassed." A week later, I received another letter from my sister. This one shorter and written in rushed handwriting. It ended with, "You won't even see the baby once. That's the route you've chosen." I shredded it and torched the remnants in my backyard fire pit. No photos, no ceremony, just ashes. Like everything they tried to salvage, they called it silence, but I called it protection. The promotion came in the middle of a normal Monday morning call, when the department leader spoke through a few project metrics before dropping news, which was effective immediately. I said thank you, accepted the offer, and scheduled my first team sync for later that week. Being promoted to head of design meant managing a small but growing team, attending strategic meetings, and eventually stepping into a six-figure salary with stock options and a confirmed leadership track. With a pay raise, I finally had the space to invest in the house. I hired a local contractor to help with some of the larger tasks, but I did the majority of it myself. I gutted and rebuilt the kitchen over 6 weekends, tile by tile, cabinet by cabinet. Then I built a back deck from scratch, leveled it, stained it, sealed it, and paid in full. On my 33rd birthday, I grilled steak on the new deck. The sun had fallen, the lights were strung, and music was playing softly from a speaker near the garden. There were no loans or family handouts, and my name was on every receipt and invoice. I poured a glass of good whiskey, opened a novel I'd been meaning to finish, and watched the stars come out one by one. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from a law office I didn't recognize, informing me that my father had suffered a stroke and was in critical condition, and asking if I wanted to be listed as an emergency contact or next of kin. I responded through my lawyer, a one-line statement. He lost that the day he ignored my ICU stay. No contact, no role. A few days later, my sister sent me an email, saying it was serious, that he might not survive, and that I would regret not visiting. She kept the tone careful, but it was clear she needed something. I did not respond. I remembered lying in that hospital bed, ribs broken, legs split, lungs fighting to breathe. The nurse saying no one had called, and my mother's voice telling me not to guilt-trip people. During coffee, a mutual acquaintance from my college days mentioned something. He casually mentioned that my sister had been trying to raise funds to help with my father's medical costs. I didn't ask how he knew. I just nodded, paid for both of our drinks, and left. My sister's next email arrived that same week, and this time she didn't try to be subtle. The next morning, I called my lawyer and had them draft a formal no-contact letter addressed to every member of my immediate family, including my mother, father, and sister. The letter was short, simple, and legally binding, and she asked if I could help just once. She knew I was doing well, and she asked if I could help just this one time. All further communication was to go through counsel, and only in the event of legal necessity. Any contact outside of those terms would be considered harassment. While organizing old files, I discovered a framed photo in the back of a drawer of all of us standing together in a park from years ago, some reunion I barely remembered. My father's hand was on my shoulder, my sister was in the middle, and my mother had her sunglasses up on her head. I looked at the photo for 2 or 3 seconds before walking it out to the trash bin and dropping it in without blinking. That night, I added one more line to my journal before bed. You left me to die, and now you ask for help because you are dying. A few days later, I hosted a small gathering in my backyard with friends from work, the mentorship group, and the neighborhood. We grilled, shared stories, and made jokes about terrible dates and strange neighbors. No one asked about my family. They only knew who I was now. We drank to resilience as the music continued into the night. A week later, I received a text from an old mutual friend with a brief message. My sister had given birth to a baby boy, and both mother and kid were healthy. I stared at the screen for a time before setting the phone down. A certified envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, signed by the delivery service, containing official legal papers and an urgent request to designate me as my father's medical power of attorney. There was no anger, sadness, or ache, only a quiet room, a full life, and the sound of the wind brushing across the new deck outside. His condition had rapidly worsened, and he was no longer capable of making medical decisions, so they needed someone to act on his behalf. I took the packet, shredded every page, and dropped the pieces into a trash bag. They wanted me to bear the legal responsibility for a man who hadn't lifted a finger when I was clinging to life in an ICU bed. He hadn't called. He hadn't turned up, and he hadn't even inquired whether I'd survived. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time personally delivered by a courier. It was a neat envelope with cream-colored paper, and inside was a long handwritten note from my sister, pages of imploring urgency disguised as family duty. She said I was the only one who could help now, that Dad needed me, that it wasn't about the past, that it was about doing the right thing in the present. I read the entire thing carefully, and there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the voicemail I left crying, the nights I slept in a rental car, or the text from our father telling me to get it together. I contacted my lawyer and asked if there was any way I could be legally bound to this. He reviewed the documents, checked state guidelines, and confirmed that unless I signed something I had no responsibility. I told him I'd never sign, and he said he'd draft a formal notice of refusal in case they tried to push again. That weekend, I received a message from someone I knew through my therapist trauma group, a nurse at the hospital where my father was staying. She had heard my name mentioned during a shift and quietly passed along a piece of information without breaking any formal rules. My father was now incoherent and confused, asking for his son over and over again, mumbling it in between moments of lucidity. I did not go. He had a choice back then. When my body was broken, when I was alone, when I couldn't even get a glass of water without aid, he chose silence, and I returned the favor by finishing my first MBA semester with straight A's, and never dropping my work performance. Around the same time, I signed a deal with a boutique creative agency downtown to lead their design division while maintaining my role at the tech company. 2 income streams, full independence, no one to answer to, no one to save. A week later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school drove up to my property and rang the gate intercom. He didn't say who he was, but I recognized his voice. I didn't say anything. Instead, I stood in my upstairs window and watched him walk back to his car. After a few minutes, the camera caught it all. That same afternoon I upgraded my security, installed perimeter motion lights, upgraded the cameras, and left specific instructions for neighbors to report any unwanted visitors. The hospital sent me a letter with a plain envelope and a white label informing me that my father had died. There were no details about the funeral or a final message from the family, just a single paragraph confirming the end of my father's life. There would be no exceptions or discussions. I folded the letter once and slid it into the fireproof lockbox with my legal papers. No grief, no anger, just the kind of finality that feels like a page closing. The next call came from the estate's executive, a formal notice that I'd been left out of everything. No inheritance, no mention, no provisions, exactly as they had warned. I told the executive to relay one message back to whoever needed to hear it. Perfect. Tell them I wouldn't have taken a cent if they begged me to. A few days later, one last letter arrived from my sister again. The envelope was thin, the handwriting sharp and messy. I didn't open it right away, but curiosity got the best of me. Inside was a single page. No more pretending, no more polite phrases, just venom. You'll die alone. Bitter, forgotten. I didn't read the rest. I folded the paper slowly, walked it out to the trash can beside the garage and dropped it in. Lid shut. Done. That was the last time I heard from any of them. And that's exactly how it will remain. A few months after my father's funeral, another courier arrived at my house and asked for my signature on a flat envelope in a padded folder. The sender's name was my sister, and inside was a smaller envelope with a note from your nephew for his future uncle to be opened in 18 years. I hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't asked to be involved in that child's life, and didn't even know the child's name. I resealed the outer envelope and returned it to the courier the next morning, unopened. Inside, there was a printed photo of a baby covered in a blue blanket resting in a cot, next to which was a second note from my sister. He deserves to know his family. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a university as part of a recovery and resilience lecture series. There was no apology, no accountability, just another angle, another attempt to reintegrate me into their story, which I also rejected. There was no room for manipulation, no tolerance for rewritten history, and I was busy building my own. I flew in, gave a talk to a room of students and professionals, and then a line formed. People wanted to thank me, ask questions, and share pieces of their own stories. I shook hands, signed programs, and walked out of that auditorium with my head up. One of the organizers had read an article I'd contributed to and reached out. I took the momentum from that event and finished something I'd started years ago. My first book. A self-published work about healing from betrayal, loss, and rebuilding without a safety net. I left out names, places, and anything traceable. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about survival. I wrote it for those who had no one come for them and made it anyway. 2 months after the book's release, I received a handwritten letter from my former high school track coach, who said he discovered the book by chance and recognized it was my halfway through. You outlived them, he wrote, in every way that counts. That same month, I completed my final mortgage payment. The house was mine, paid for entirely by the work I did. No co-signers, no family loans, no secret assistants, just a man with a broken spine, some design talents, and a lot of restrictions. At one of the resilient workshops I was attending, I met someone intelligent, forthright, and friendly. We kept crossing paths during classes and eventually sat together for lunch. Conversations led to long walks, and finally dinner. She had her own scars, unique, yet deep. She knew what it meant to rebuild alone. During our 5th date, I told her everything. There's no sweet coating. She didn't flinch from the crash, the hospital, or the inheritance threats. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "That is not your humiliation, that is their failure." We kept seeing each other. I returned to the hospital where I'd nearly died. I didn't regret cutting my family out anymore, but I did regret giving them so many chances first. Every ignored voicemail, every unanswered message, every time I hoped they'd show up and they didn't. I gave them too much room. This time, as part of a donation drive for trauma patients, a nurse near the reception desk recognized me. Her eyes widened, then welled up. "You were the one we all thought wouldn't make it," she said. She led me down the hall and pointed out the room where I'd stayed, which had recently been painted. The bed was different, but I remembered the ceiling tiles. Before I left, I scribbled a note on a clean index card and gently taped it to the underside of the bed frame. Sometimes the ones you need the most walk away, and sometimes you're better off as a result. When I got home, I made one last decision. I contacted the local post office and requested that any future mail from my sister, her husband, or anyone with that name be marked return to sender. I filed the forms, and from now on their words would never land at my door again. That weekend, I grilled steak under the stars again, with the same setup as before. Deck lights on. Speaker humming low. Glass of bourbon nearby, and the wind rustling the leaves above. I stood there for a moment, the silence stretching out around me. I wasn't angry or bitter. I had built a life so full that there was no room for old ghosts. Mercy isn't always deserved. Sometimes denying it is how you show yourself you matter. My family turned their backs on me during the darkest moment of my life. But I rose anyway. When they returned, attempting to rewrite the past and draw me back into their narrative, I closed the door, locked it, and walked away. Mom mortgaged her house to fight me in court, all to defend my convicted brother's right to be near my 3 girls. Patrick, my brother, was convicted of pedophilia and served 5 years in prison for assaulting a 7-year-old. But when he got out, my entire family insisted that I let him around my 3 girls. When I declined, they launched a big harassment campaign, including having him show up at my 8-year-old's birthday party with a doll dressed in a swimming costume, forcing me to obtain a restraining order. But then my mother spent her retirement assets on his legal fees to battle me, while the entire family hounded us and filed fake CPS complaints, forcing us to pay him $30,000 to leave us alone. When my brother Patrick was released from prison, my mother contacted me 17 times. I knew exactly what she wanted before I picked it up. She had been preparing me for months with statements about forgiveness and second chances, but there was no way I was allowing a convicted pedophile near my 3 girls. Patrick had served a 5-year sentence for what he had done to his neighbor's daughter. The girl was 7. My oldest kid had just turned 8 years old, but I felt like the family monster for saying no. Mom arrived at my place the morning of his release. She had an entire speech prepared about how he transformed and discovered God. She pulled out a folder containing certificates from jail programs. He finished every course they offered, she stated. This effectively erased what he had done. Where is your Christian heart? I kept my response simple. He was not welcome in my home. Not for supper, not for the holidays, and not for 5 minutes. My girl's safety came first. Mom's expression changed from pleading to outright fury. She spat out. Those are his nieces. You are depriving him his family. The guilt campaign began immediately. My sister Beth called and cried about Patrick having nowhere to go. Every morning, Dad sends me Bible scriptures about forgiveness. Even my Aunt Helen, who lives 3 states away, felt compelled to tell me that everyone deserved a second shot. However, they saved the real manipulation for Sunday dinner. I had stopped at Mom's to pick up my grandmother's ring, which she had been resizing. The whole family was present. Patrick too. He sat at the kitchen table as if nothing had occurred, as if he had not ruined a child's innocence. My daughter Elise exclaimed, "Uncle Patrick," before I could stop her. She dashed at him, her sisters close following. I've never moved that quickly in my life. I gathered all 3 children and went toward the door. Patrick had the audacity to appear hurt. I only wanted to meet them, he explained softly. I'm their uncle. That was when I lost it. I told him that being blood did not provide him access to my children. I reminded everyone in the room what he had been guilty of. Mom literally covered her ears. Dad grumbled something about lingering in the past. Beth accused me of traumatizing the girls. The smear effort began the next day. Mom informed her church that I was keeping her grandchildren from her. She conveniently left out why. Beth wrote on Facebook about how some people do not comprehend atonement. Several relatives responded with prayer hands and Bible quotes. My phone was inundated with messages from folks who didn't even know the complete situation. Then Patrick began turning up at locations like the grocery store and the park, always maintaining distance and claiming coincidence. He would wave to the females from across the playground. I began capturing everything: date, time, location, and witnesses. My spouse installed security cameras after we noticed him driving by our house 3 times in one day. The breaking point occurred during Jane's birthday party. We rented the community center and invited her to the entire class. Halfway through the cake, Patrick entered with a gift. Mom trailed behind him, smiling as if she had organized something wonderful. "Every girl deserves an uncle on her birthday," she stated. Parents began snatching their children and left. One father recognized Patrick from the register website. Within minutes, our daughter's party had been wrecked. Jane cried in the restroom as her classmates' parents murmured in the parking lot. He brought a bathing suit-clad doll as a present. I applied for a restraining order the next morning. That's when the real war began. Mom used her retirement resources to employ Patrick, a lawyer. They claimed I was alienating him from his family. The lawyer contended that Patrick had served his sentence and deserved to see his relatives. My mother testified against me in court. The judge granted a temporary order but warned that it might not last long. Patrick had finished his probation. He wasn't breaking any rules by being near us. The final hearing was scheduled for next month. Meanwhile, familial harassment escalated. Dad began turning up at my husband's workplace, urging him to speak reason into me. Beth attempted to pick up the girls from school, stating I had requested her to. The school had to remove my entire family off the permitted pickup list. Even family I hadn't spoken with in years took sides. Last night I discovered Elise going through old Christmas photos on my phone. "Why don't we see Uncle Patrick anymore?" she inquired. "Grandma says, you are being rude to him." I wanted to shout. Instead, I hugged her tightly and changed the subject, but I knew this was far from over. The final hearing was in 2 weeks, and Mom had made it clear that she'd mortgage her house to fight me. That's when I realized how far this would go, and I knew I had to get ahead of whatever Mom was planning. The mortgage threat wasn't empty. She'd already spent her retirement savings on Patrick's lawyer. I began calling every family law attorney in town and scheduling consultations. If I could conflict them out by meeting with them first, Mom would have to look elsewhere for representation. My husband took time off work to assist with the girls while I prepared for court, and we enrolled them in after-school programs to reduce the possibility of unexpected family visits. After Beth's pickup attempt, the school principal agreed to personally escort them to the bus. 3 days later, I received a call from my cousin Cheryl, who had always remained neutral in family drama, and she asked if we could meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Cheryl looked exhausted as she sat across from me in the cafe. She looked around uneasily before pulling out her phone. "I need to show you something," she said, scanning through her texts. "Your mother has been organizing the family. She has a group chat." My stomach fell as I read the messages. 23 family members were actively plotting methods to push Patrick and my daughters to communicate. They talked about showing up at school activities, unexpectedly stumbling into us at the supermarket, and even having various relatives petition for grandparent rights to legally overwhelm me. Cheryl slid her phone back into her purse. The worst part was seeing how they talked about me. According to them, I was mentally unstable, vindictive, and poisoning my children against their loving family. Mom had convinced them all that Patrick's conviction was a misunderstanding, and that the girl's family had overreacted. "I have kids too," she added gently. I checked the court records. What did Patrick do? It was not a misunderstanding. I spent the rest of the day screenshotting everything Cheryl texted me. The group conversation revealed their whole playbook, and they intended to load the courtroom with supporting family members, including several aunts and uncles who had prepared character letters for Patrick. Mom had even persuaded my childhood pediatrician to write about how devoted Patrick had been. That evening, I discovered Patrick's truck parked across from our house again, this time with Mom by his side. They sat there for an hour just watching, and when my husband went outside to confront them, they drove away, only to return the next morning. The girls noticed the tension, and Jane inquired as to why we couldn't eat at restaurants anymore. Our lawyer suggested that the repeated surveillance could strengthen our case, but cautioned that family court judges frequently favored reconciliation. Patrick's completion of his sentence worked in his favor, and the system regarded him as rehabilitated. A week before the hearing, I was carrying groceries when I saw a woman observing me from across the parking lot. Elise asked why Grandma couldn't babysit, and I gave her vague excuses about everyone being busy. But kids are smart, and they sensed something was wrong. She approached me as I locked my trunk, introducing herself as Patricia from Child Protective Services. Someone had put in a report about me denying my children access to family. My hands shook as I gave her my lawyer's contact information. Patricia was professional, but thorough. Our lawyer subpoenaed the CPS complaint, which alleged emotional abuse through family alienation. The home visit went well, the girls' rooms were clean, the fridge was stocked, their artwork covered the walls, and they chatted happily with Patricia about school and friends. But I knew this was just another tactic to wear me down. It was no surprise that it came from Mom's address, as she had formally accused me of emotional abuse for protecting my children from a convicted pedophile. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. As the hearing approached, Patrick became more daring, jogging past our house every morning, always careful to stay on public property, and waving at the windows, knowing the girls might see. I kept them away from the front rooms, but it meant living like prisoners in our own home. Dad left voicemails about how I was destroying the family. Beth sent long emails about forgiveness and healing. Relatives I'd blocked created new social media accounts to message me. They all sang the same tune. I was cruel, unreasonable, and unchristian. Then came the letters. Mom orchestrated a campaign in which family members wrote. I intercepted the letters addressed to them at our house, but the violation felt profound. They were attempting to manipulate my children directly now. I read each letter before shredding it, and they all followed a template. How much they missed the girls. How sad Uncle Patrick was. And how Mommy was keeping them apart. One aunt even included photos of Patrick looking dejected. My husband installed additional locks and an alarm system, and another sent drawings Patrick had allegedly made for them in prison. I'm curious why the entire family is so invested in defending Patrick's rights. With 23 relatives in a group chat and coordinated letters from everyone. We changed our routes to school and activities. I started grocery shopping in the neighboring town, and we basically went into hiding while living in our own house. The weekend before court, Mom made her biggest move yet. She filed for emergency grandparent visitation rights, painting me as an unstable mother who had cut off family access without cause. She demanded immediate supervised visits with the girls, with Patrick allowed to attend as their uncle. Our lawyer called it a kitchen sink approach. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. The emergency petition would be heard alongside our restraining order request, and Mom was hoping that a judge would compromise by denying the restraining order but granting her some visitation. I spent that weekend organizing evidence, security footage, documentation of every encounter, group chat screenshots, character references from teachers and doctors who actually knew. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzling. I dressed carefully, conservatively but not severely, and my husband wore his only suit. We dropped the girls off at school early, my stomach turning at leaving them, even with the new security measures. The courthouse parking lot was full of familiar cars. Patrick sat in the front row of the courtroom with Mom and their lawyer, dressed in a new suit and having gotten a haircut. He looked like a respectable uncle, not someone on the sex offender registry. I recognized aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, who stood in clusters, whispering and giving us dark looks as we passed. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue, the image of a grieving grandmother. Our side of the courtroom was nearly empty, just us, our lawyer, and, surprisingly, Cheryl. She gave me a small nod as we took our seats. Whatever happened today, I wouldn't let them win. When the judge entered, I gripped my husband's hand. Everything we'd fought for came down to this moment. My daughter's safety was at stake, and I was prepared to fight with everything I had. The judge's gavel struck the bench, and the hearings began. Our lawyer presented the security tape first, which showed Patrick's persistent surveillance of our home. The timestamp suggested a pattern of escalating conduct. Mom's lawyer countered by arguing that a man had the right to jog on public streets. During the first recess, I noticed Beth in the hallway making phone calls, and she kept glancing at me while whispering urgently into her phone. My husband stayed close to me, his hand on my back as we navigated through clusters of hostile relatives. When Mom took the stand, she painted herself as a heartbroken grandmother denied access to her grandchildren. Our lawyer's cross-examination revealed the reality beneath her facade. She showed images of happier times, family gatherings when Patrick played with relatives, and her tears seemed genuine as she detailed how I had torn the family apart. When asked directly about Patrick's conviction, Mom claimed the victim's family had blown things out of proportion, and Patrick had simply been showing affection. Several relatives in the gallery nodded along with her delusions, and the judge ordered a brief recess to review evidence. In the hallway, Dad cornered my husband near the water fountain, and I watched his face turn green as he gestured wildly, clearly attempting to pressure my husband into dropping the case. My husband simply walked away, leaving Dad fuming. Cheryl testified next, bringing printouts of the group chat messages, which Mom's lawyer objected to repeatedly, but the judge allowed them as evidence of coordinated harassment. Cheryl's hands trembled as she read aloud their plans to ambush us at various locations. Patrick took the stand later in the afternoon. Patrick couldn't explain why he'd chosen to jog past our house, and he stumbled when asked about the birthday party intrusion. He'd clearly been coached, speaking softly about rehabilitation and redemption, and claiming he just wanted to be a part of his niece's lives to watch them grow up. His calm demeanor cracked when confronted with the victim impact statement from his case. During the lunch break, I discovered Mom had arranged for several church members to be present. They filled an entire row wearing matching crosses and shooting disapproving looks my way. One woman I recognized from Mom's Bible study group hissed at me in the bathroom. The CPS investigation results were then presented. Patricia herself testified that she'd found no evidence of abuse or neglect, and that the children were thriving and well-adjusted. Mom's lawyer tried to spin this as evidence that the girls needed their extended family, but it fell flat. My testimony came last, and I detailed every incident, every violation of boundaries, and every attempt to manipulate my daughters, as well as the letters they'd sent directly to them. I explained how we'd changed our entire lives to avoid Patrick's stalking. Mom's lawyer accused me of being paranoid and controlling, implying that I was using my children as weapons in a family feud. I remained calm, sticking to facts and documentation. The judge announced that he would review all evidence and make a decision within 3 days. Patrick made his move as we left the courtroom, stepping directly into my path and forcing me to stop. His eyes held a coldness that chilled me, and he leaned close enough for only me to hear his whispered threat about seeing the girls soon. My husband immediately positioned himself between us, and our lawyer documented the interaction. Patrick stepped back with a smirk, rejoining Mom and their attorney. The threat was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but the message was clear. That evening, we found our mailbox stuffed with letters from various relatives condemning our actions and demanding reconciliation. Someone had also left a Bible on our doorstep with specific verses about forgiveness highlighted in yellow. The next morning brought new challenges. Jane's teacher called to report that Beth had shown up at school claiming a family emergency. The school had followed our protocols and denied her access, but Beth had created a scene that upset several students. I drove to the school right away to speak with the principal, who showed me security footage of Beth arguing with the front desk staff and demanding to take the girls for a family emergency. When Beth was denied access to her nieces, she burst into tears. The principal assured me that they would keep a close eye on things, but suggested that we look into another school. The situation was causing havoc, and other parents were concerned. I left feeling defeated, knowing that Mom's campaign was working exactly as intended. At home, I found my husband installing additional cameras around our property. He'd taken the rest of the week off work after Dad showed up there again, this time with Uncle Helen's husband, and they'd attempted to corner him in the parking lot during lunch. Cheryl called that afternoon with disturbing news. The family group chat had turned into planning sessions for after the judge's decision. They talked about filing multiple legal actions to drain our resources, and some suggested showing up at the girls' activities to establish unintentional contact. I spent hours documenting these new threats for our lawyer, and each piece of evidence felt like another weight on my shoulders. The girls sensed the tension, becoming clingy and anxious. Elise had started having nightmares, but she couldn't explain what scared her. Patrick escalated further 2 days after the hearing, when he showed up at the grocery store where I was shopping with the girls. He didn't approach directly, but instead positioned himself where the girls would see him, waving enthusiastically and calling out their names. I rushed the girls out of the store, abandoning our cart. Jane asked why we were leaving without our groceries, and Elise asked why we couldn't talk to Uncle Patrick. Their innocent questions broke my heart as I struggled to explain without frightening them. That night we discovered someone had been in our backyard. Despite the fact that nothing was taken or damaged, our daughter's outdoor toys had been rearranged, their playhouse door was open, and 3 wrapped presents had been left inside. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during that exact time frame, so my husband called the police while I checked every lock and window. The officers took a report, but explained that without proof of forced entry or footage, there was little they could do. The gifts contained dolls dressed in bathing suits, like the one from Jane's party, and the psychological warfare was taking its toll. I jumped at every sound, checked locks obsessively, and barely slept. My husband began working from home to maintain constant vigilance. We were prisoners in our own lives, exactly what Mom and Patrick wanted. The morning of the judge's decision arrived with a thunderstorm, and we dressed carefully again, preparing for either outcome. I'd arranged for a trusted friend from my mother's group to watch the girls, someone completely disconnected from my family. The courthouse was even busier than before. In the courtroom, Patrick sat between Mom and their lawyer, dressed in a new suit, as if they were attending a wedding rather than attempting to force their children to be near a predator. Mom had rallied additional supporters, including several prominent church members, who wore color-coordinated outfits and carried signs promoting family unity. Mom clutched a handkerchief dramatically as the judge entered with a thick folder of documents and began reviewing the case. It was clear that someone had missed the memo on what family unity entails, as he kept turning to smile at family members who were playing the role of persecuted victim. He mentioned Patrick's completed sentence and rehabilitation programs, as well as the evidence of stalking, coordinated harassment, and a CPS complaint that appeared retaliatory. I felt my heart racing as he talked about the balance between protecting children and maintaining family bonds, citing cases where courts had reunified families after criminal convictions. Every word felt like another step toward losing everything we'd fought for. The judge's decision was mixed, but he did extend the restraining order for a year, citing the stalking behavior and harassment. The security footage showed clear patterns of stalking, the group chat messages showed coordinated harassment, and the birthday party incident demonstrated blatant disregard for boundaries. Mom's side erupted in whispers and movement, while others appeared satisfied with the partial victory, and Patrick's face showed fury beneath his calm facade. However, he granted Mom limited grandparent visitation rights, 1 supervised hour per month at a neutral location, with Patrick barred from attending. Beth stopped us in the hallway as we were about to leave. Our lawyer explained that the restraining order was now more difficult to challenge, and the supervised visitation gave us more control over the situation. We pushed through with our lawyer's assistance, ignoring shouted questions about denying children their family. Security intervened when she grabbed my arm, attempting to force me to listen, and her removal caused another scene of stares and whispers. We had won the main battle, but it had come at a high cost. Mom had her foot in the door now, and Patrick would undoubtedly use her visits to maintain indirect contact. Despite the security cameras, we discovered more gifts on our porch when we arrived home. This time, 3 identical necklaces with heart pendants. The message was clear. Patrick wasn't giving up. He'd simply found new ways to violate boundaries while technically following the court order. That evening, our lawyer called with concerning news. Mom's attorney had already filed paperwork requesting expanded visitation, claiming that the supervised visits were overly restrictive and harmful to the grandmother-grandchild relationship. After the girls had gone to bed, I talked with my husband and discussed our next steps, including relocating, changing schools, and even officially changing our names. It felt impossible to safeguard our daughters while keeping their normal lives. Cheryl texted screenshots from the family chat where they were celebrating Mom's partial victory and strategizing how to use the visit strategically. Some suggested having Patrick unexpectedly appear at the visitation location, while others talked about wearing recording devices to gather evidence against me. The next morning brought new challenges. Jane's best friend's mother called to politely uninvite her from a sleepover because word had spread about the courthouse drama and Patrick's presence on the registry. She was sorry, but she had to think of all the children's safety. I understood her position, but Jane's face crumbled when I explained. My husband's parents, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, finally called to offer their support, but suggested that we might be handling things too harshly. She couldn't understand why she was being punished for adult problems, and Elise and our youngest became whiny and difficult as a result. Their well-meaning ignorance hurt more than outright hostility. We spent the week establishing new routines around the court orders. I met with the supervised visitation coordinator to establish strict protocols. No gifts, no photos, no messages to relay. Mom would have exactly 60 minutes to visit under professional supervision. The first visit was scheduled for the following week. I carefully prepared the girls, explaining that Grandma would visit them at a special location. They seemed excited but confused about the restrictions. Jane asked if Uncle Patrick would be there as well, and my heart sank at having that conversation again. Meanwhile, Patrick found legal ways to stay in our lives. He volunteered at community events we'd previously attended, and he joined organizations where we had memberships, always keeping the required distance but ensuring we knew he was there. Dad escalated his own campaign, showing up at my husband's workplace despite warnings, waiting in the parking lot with Bible verses and printed articles about forgiveness. Security eventually barred him from the property, but he simply moved to the public sidewalk, and Beth began her own harassment via social media. She created multiple accounts to message our friends, sharing her version of events. She painted me as mentally unstable, claiming I was denying my children loving family relationships. Some friends distanced themselves, unsure what to believe. The stress manifested physically as I developed migraines and insomnia. My husband's blood pressure skyrocketed, and the girls began acting out at school, their grades slipping. We began family therapy, which added to our mounting legal bills, and our lawyer warned us that Mom's team was preparing a larger strategy, hiring a private investigator to document our lives, looking for any ammunition. Every public outing became a potential trap, and every interaction with the girls could be twisted into evidence. One morning, I caught Patrick photographing our house from a legal distance. Cheryl's family group chat revealed their long-term plans, which included waiting out the restraining order while gathering evidence of parental alienation. He made certain I saw him, even waving at the security camera, and he was also documenting everything. We installed panic buttons throughout the house and established code words with the girls. If anyone approached them unexpectedly, they were to find a trusted adult right away. They coached each other on what to document and how to present themselves as victims. The weight of transforming my children into cautious, fearful versions of themselves crushed me every day. A week before the first supervised visit, Mom sent a formal letter through her lawyer requesting permission to bring photo albums to share family history with the girls. When we declined, she accused us of cultural erasure and denying the children their heritage. As the visit approached, Patrick became more assertive and began visiting businesses near the visitation center, establishing legitimate reasons to be there. He couldn't enter during the visit, but he could position himself nearby and the law was on his side. I met with the visitation supervisor to express my concerns, and she assured me that their protocols were strict, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had dealt with families like ours before, and she knew how determined individuals could circumvent even the best safeguards. None of us slept well the night before the first visit, and the girls sensed our anxiety. Jane frequently inquired if something was wrong. Elise clung to me, and our youngest returned to behaviors she'd outgrown months before. That morning I dressed the girls carefully, wanting them to seem well cared for while not giving Mom any reason to keep them away from her. My hands shook as I braided their hair, and my husband double-checked the recording device our lawyer had permitted us to carry. The visitation center was a converted house designed to feel comfortable while maintaining security, and we came early to familiarize the kids with the surroundings. The supervisor took the girls to the visitation room while we waited in a separate area. Mom arrived on time, dressed impeccably, and carrying a small bag. Her face lit up as she saw the girls through the window, and for a brief moment, I saw the grandmother she could have been if she hadn't chosen Patrick over their safety. I watched on the closed-circuit monitor as Mom hugged them sadly. She had brought approved coloring papers and crayons for 30 minutes, and it appeared to be a normal grandmother visit. Then Mom began her manipulation, talking about missing family events and how sorry everyone was. The supervisor redirected her several times, but Mom was skilled at subtle emotional manipulation. When the visit ended, the girls were confused and upset. They didn't understand why they couldn't see Grandma at her house, or why Uncle Patrick couldn't visit either. The car ride home was filled with questions that I struggled to answer honestly, without further damaging them. That afternoon, our lawyer called. Patrick had filed his own petition claiming defamation and emotional distress, claiming that our false accusations had harmed his reputation and relationships. I'm curious why the judge would grant visitation rights in the face of documented stalking and harassment. It was a clear vindictive move, but fighting it would cost us more money. During the second visit, Mom brought a family scrapbook she had compiled, and the war of attrition continued. Every legal filing drained our savings, every harassment incident shattered our peace, and every manipulation attempt harmed our children's innocence. The supervisor had accepted it after checking for objectionable content, but Mom had been clever. She'd included images of Patrick at every family milestone, portraying him as the beloved uncle the girls were missing. Our lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the defamation lawsuit, but the judge allowed it to proceed to discovery, which included depositions and documents. The girls absorbed every word, their confusion growing. When they returned to the waiting area, Jane immediately asked why Uncle Patrick couldn't attend the visits if he was so nice. Patrick's strategy was clear: he drained us financially while maintaining his victim narrative. The family's coordination reached new heights, as various relatives began to show up at the girls' activities. An aunt would show up at dance class, a cousin at soccer practice, and they maintained legal distance while making their presence felt. Other parents began to notice the pattern of family members lurking around. Cheryl continued to feed me information from the group chat. They developed a rotation schedule to maintain constant pressure without any individual violating the restraining order. They documented every sighting of us, building what they called their alienation portfolio. 3 weeks after the court decision, I discovered Mom had enrolled in the same gym where I took yoga classes. She attended different sessions, but I always saw her in the parking lot. The girl's behavior deteriorated further. Jane became withdrawn and stopped inviting friends over. Elise's nightmares worsened, but she still couldn't explain what scared her, and our youngest began having tantrums reminiscent of her toddler years. The family therapist suggested that the constant tension was affecting them more than we realized. Patrick's current strategy was escalated when he got a job at a hardware store 2 blocks from the visitation center, giving him a legitimate reason to be in the area during every visit. I noticed his truck parked strategically where we'd have to pass it entering and leaving, and Mom pushed the boundaries even further during the 3rd supervised visit. She gave each girl a locket with family photos inside, including Patrick. The supervisor forced her to remove them, but the damage had already been done. The girls didn't understand why they couldn't keep Grandma's gifts. Our financial situation deteriorated due to legal fees, therapy costs, and security measures. My husband took on extra shifts while I freelanced from home to avoid leaving the girls with sitters, and the stress showed in both of our faces, with dark circles becoming permanent fixtures. Then came the accident, or what appeared to be an accident. I was backing out of a parking space at the grocery store when another car hit me, and the driver jumped out, apologizing profusely. Only when I saw Uncle Helen's son did I realize this was orchestrated. The deposition for Patrick's defamation case was scheduled for the following month, and our lawyer prepared me for grueling questions designed to make me appear unstable. They'd use every family incident, every protective measure, as evidence of my irrational behavior. Toward a reformed man, he insisted on calling the cops and creating an official report that painted me as distracted and careless. Mom's visitation requests increased. She petitioned for unsupervised visits, citing the successful supervised sessions, and included affidavits from family members attesting to her character and my unreasonable restrictions. Each filing required a response, which cost money we didn't have. I began noticing cars following me on errands, different vehicles, but always maintaining the same careful distance. When I mentioned it to our lawyer, he said proving coordination would be nearly impossible. They'd learned from the group chat evidence to be more careful. The 4th supervised visit brought new manipulation. Mom spent the entire hour telling the girls about family traditions they were missing: birthday parties, holiday gatherings, summer barbecues, all of which were portrayed as magical events stolen from them. Patrick began jogging past the visitation center during our visits, timing it perfectly to cross our path, and waving at the girls through the window while maintaining legal distance. The supervisor documented it, but technically he wasn't violating any orders. Our home became a fortress of anxiety. Patrick's lawyer interrogated me for 6 hours, questioning me about every decision I'd made since his release. I struggled to explain why we lived as if we were hiding without frightening them or poisoning them against the family they still loved. We added more cameras, window sensors, and kept the curtains drawn at all times. They portrayed my protective measures as paranoid delusions, and my documentation as obsessive behavior. I kept my cool, but inside I was cracking. 2 days later, Jane's teacher called with concerns. Jane had written a story about a family torn apart by a mean mother who wouldn't let anyone visit, and the teacher recognized the emotional distress and suggested additional counseling. Another expense, another acknowledgement of how this war was harming my children. Mom's next action was calculated. She began attending the same church we'd shifted to, and after leaving hers, she sat across the sanctuary, dabbing at tears during services. Churchgoers who didn't know our tale saw a grandma split from her grandchildren, and some began avoiding us. My husband suggested borrowing from his 401k, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable. Patrick had hired a second attorney, someone known for aggressive litigation, and the message was clear. They could afford to escalate, whereas we couldn't. During the 5th supervised visit, something shifted, and Mom dropped her careful facade for a brief moment. When the supervisor stepped out briefly to use the restroom, Mom quickly whispered something to the girls. I couldn't hear it through the monitor, but I saw their faces change. Jane looked scared, and Elise was confused in the car. Afterward, neither girl would tell me what Grandma had said. They exchanged glances but remained silent. That night, I found them huddled together in Jane's bed, whispering. When I entered, they immediately stopped talking. The secret Mom had planned. Patrick filed additional motions in his defamation case, claiming lost wages from jobs he couldn't get due to my slander, and requesting access to my social media accounts, email records, and personal journals. Our lawyer fought each request, but judges frequently favored broad discovery, and the family's pressure campaign evolved. Instead of making direct contact, they started a whisper campaign in our community, sending anonymous letters to parents at school, calling local businesses to question our mental stability, and gradually shrinking our world. Cheryl warned me that Mom was planning something for the holidays, and the group chat was filled with cryptic references to Christmas justice and reunion planning. The sixth supervised visit was scheduled for December 23rd, and Mom arrived with a bag of wrapped presents that the supervisor had to inspect. Each gift was appropriate, including books, puzzles, and art supplies, but each contained subtle reminders of what the girls were missing. That evening, I discovered why the girls had been secretive. Elise finally broke down and told me what Grandma had whispered. Uncle Patrick had gifts for them hidden at her house, special gifts he'd made himself, and they could have them if they could persuade Mommy to let them visit. The manipulation was masterful, and my children now had a secret with their grandmother. They didn't understand why I was being mean about presents, and Jane accused me of ruining Christmas. On Christmas Eve, we discovered 3 packages on our doorstep, left at 3 a.m. by someone in dark clothing who knew exactly where our blind spots were. Inside were handmade dolls clearly crafted with patience and skill, as evidenced by the security cameras. The card simply said, "Love, Uncle Patrick," in neat handwriting. I wanted to throw them away, but the girls had already seen them. Taking the dolls would make me the villain who stole Christmas presents, and keeping them indicated Patrick had successfully invaded our home once more. My husband and I exchanged worried glances over the girls' heads as they opened their presents on Christmas morning, clearly thinking about the dolls in the garage and the mysterious gifts at Grandma's house. I made a compromise and put them in the garage, promising that we'd figure it out later. The day after Christmas, our lawyer called with bad news. The judge in Patrick's defamation case had partially ruled in his favor, dismissing the wage loss claims but finding that I had potentially damaged his reputation beyond the scope of protecting my children, and a trial would determine damages. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the legal documents, because we couldn't afford a trial. The retainer alone would bankrupt us. Mom and Patrick had won their war of financial attrition. I had to make an impossible choice: surrender or lose everything fighting. That night, I found my husband in the garage, looking at the dolls Patrick had made, each of which was crafted with disturbing detail and dressed like our daughters. The implications made my skin crawl, but legally they were just gifts from an uncle, and we had no proof of sinister intent. The next morning, Jane's best friend's mother called to say they were switching schools. The drama surrounding our family had become too much, and other parents were considering doing the same. During the 7th supervised visit, I instructed our lawyer to offer a settlement in Patrick's defamation case, despite the fact that the number made me sick. As I watched Mom manipulate my daughters with practiced ease, seeing their growing resentment toward me, and feeling the financial news tightening, I realized I had to change tactics. I couldn't win by playing defense anymore. Despite the fact that we didn't have $30,000, the settlement came with conditions Patrick couldn't refuse, including a permanent no-contact agreement that went beyond the restraining order. Patrick accepted the settlement, probably thinking he'd find a way around it later, and we had to liquidate our retirement accounts to pay for it. Despite the fact that it felt like paying a ransom to a kidnapper, Mom's reaction was swift and vicious. She filed for expanded visitation rights, claiming the settlement proved I'd been wrong about Patrick, but our lawyer had anticipated this, and the settlement included Patrick's acknowledgement that continued contact could be detrimental to the children's well-being. The judge who reviewed Mom's petition saw through her manipulation. He observed a pattern of escalating behavior, coordinated harassment, and the use of supervised visits to undermine parental authority. Instead of expanding access, he reduced it to quarterly visits with stricter supervision. Mom's investment in Patrick had cost her everything, including her retirement savings, relationship with her grandchildren, and now her limited access. The family group chat erupted in rage and disbelief, and Cheryl sent me screenshots of their outburst. Some blamed Mom for pushing too hard, while others blamed Patrick for taking the money. The coalition that had terrorized us for months had fractured into bitter factions, and we used the breathing room to rebuild. Jane's school agreed to put in more security measures. We found a new therapist who specialized in family manipulation dynamics, and we gradually, carefully, began explaining the age-appropriate truth to the girls about why Uncle Patrick couldn't be around them. The quarterly visits with Mom became less traumatic, and with stricter supervision and reduced frequency, she couldn't maintain the same manipulation. The girls began to see her as a distant relative rather than a central figure in their lives. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. 6 months later, Patrick violated the no-contact agreement by sending birthday cards to each girl through a third party. Our lawyer immediately filed for contempt, and this time, the judge had no patience. Patrick faced jail time or a substantial fine, which he chose, further draining Mom's resources because she was still funding his legal battles. The extended family eventually fled. Without Mom's money to fund their campaign, and with legal barriers entrenched, most found it simpler to move on. A few remained, but their individual efforts lacked the coordinated impact of the group onslaught. On the anniversary of Patrick's release, I sat in my backyard watching my daughters play. We'd paid a terrible price, financial ruin, family destruction, months of terror, but they were safe. Their innocence was scarred, but not shattered. My husband joined me, bringing coffee. We didn't need words. We'd survived by choosing the battles we could win and accepting the costs of those we couldn't. The war wasn't over. As I hugged them close, I reflected on the cost of protection. It would never be perfect, but we'd accomplished what was most important. The girls ran up to us, their faces beaming with joy. They'd adapted to our new normal with the resilience of children, and they now understood why some family members weren't safe, why love sometimes meant keeping distance. Every parent would pay it without hesitation, but few understood the true cost until the bill came due. We'd paid in money, relationships, and innocence, but watching my daughters play safely in our yard, I knew I'd pay it again. The restraining order would need to be renewed eventually, Mom would get her quarterly visits, and Patrick would most likely probe for new weaknesses, but for the time being my daughters are safe. I found it strange how the mother aged so much when she lost. Was she actually believing she was doing the right thing, or was this all about control from the start? Sometimes the only triumph that matters is surviving each struggle and preserving what you love most.